Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Power. Richard "Rick" Bowman stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a conquered territory. At 55, he commanded an empire built from nothing. Bowman Industries, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate spanning construction, real estate, and private security. His reflection in the glass showed a man carved from granite. Steel gray hair, sharp jawline, and eyes that had never shown mercy to those who crossed him. The son of a blue-collar welder who died in a factory accident when Rick was 16, he had clawed his way up from the streets of Detroit with nothing but raw ambition and an unforgiving memory. Every slight, every betrayal, every person who had underestimated him, he remembered them all, and in time, he had made them all pay. 23 years ago, he had married Diana Whitmore, the daughter of a failing textile magnate. She was beautiful, refined, everything he thought he needed to complete his transformation from street fighter to corporate titan. Their wedding had been the social event of the season, sealing his acceptance into circles that had once sneered at his working-class origins. Their son Trevor, now 25, had been born into the privilege Rick had fought to create. Where Rick was forged in hardship, Trevor was molded in comfort. A weakness Rick had tried to beat out of him through military school and corporate training, but some steel simply couldn't be tempered. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Bowman, your wife is here to see you." Rick didn't turn from the window. "Send her in." Diana entered with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent decades performing for others. Even at 48, she was stunning. Auburn hair perfectly styled, designer dress that cost more than most people's cars, and the kind of smile that had once made him believe in things like love and loyalty. "Darling, I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice carrying that slight southern accent she'd cultivated despite being born in Michigan. "When have you ever cared about interrupting my work?" Rick's tone was neutral, professional. Over the years, their conversations had become exercises in careful diplomacy. Diana moved to the leather chair across from his desk, crossing her legs with calculated elegance. "I wanted to discuss Trevor's new position at the foundation. He's so excited about the opportunity to prove himself." The Bowman Family Foundation was Rick's tax shelter disguised as philanthropy, handling charitable donations and community investments. It was also where he'd banished Trevor after his son's latest failure in the construction division, a project that had gone over budget by $3 million due to Trevor's incompetence. "Trevor will do what he's told, when he's told," Rick said, finally turning from the window. "Just like always." Something flickered in Diana's eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or guilt. "He's your son, Rick. Our son. He deserves a chance to. He deserves nothing." Rick's voice could have frozen molten steel. "Everything he has, every opportunity, every dollar, it's mine. I give it, and I can take it away." Diana's smile never wavered, but Rick caught the slight tightening around her eyes. After 23 years of marriage, he could read her tells better than a poker player's. Something was different about her lately. Distracted phone calls, unexplained absences, new jewelry she claimed to have found in the back of her closet. "Of course, darling. I just think. Thinking isn't required, Diana. Just looking beautiful and staying out of my way." Rick returned to his desk, a signal that the conversation was over. But Diana didn't move. "Actually, there's something else. Trevor mentioned he might need to make some transfers from the foundation accounts. Something about an emergency loan for a friend." Rick's pen stopped moving across the contract he'd been reviewing. "What kind of emergency?" "I don't know the details. Some legal trouble, I think. Trevor said it was temporary, just until this friend could get back on his feet." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rick set down his pen with deliberate care and fixed his wife with a stare that had made seasoned executives wet themselves. "What's the friend's name?" "Carlos something. Rivera, I could think." Trevor said, "He's an entrepreneur, very charming." "Get out." Diana blinked. "I'm sorry. Get out of my office." Now, for a moment, her mask slipped revealing something Rick hadn't seen in years: fear. She gathered her purse and stood, but paused at the door. "Rick, I hope you're not going to close the door behind you." After she left, Rick sat in silence for several minutes, processing what he'd just learned. Trevor was planning to use foundation money to bail out Diana's friend, a friend she was unusually interested in protecting. The pieces were falling into place with the inevitability of a controlled demolition. He pressed the intercom. "Beth, give me everything we have on Carlos Rivera. Employment history, criminal background, financial records, everything. And I want it within the hour." "Yes, sir." Rick leaned back in his chair, a cold smile spreading across his face. In his early days, he'd learned that betrayal was like cancer. It had to be cut out completely, or it would spread and kill everything healthy around it. He'd built his empire on that principle, eliminating threats before they could metastasize. Some men might have confronted their wife directly, demanded explanations, sought counseling. But Rick Bowman wasn't some man. He was a predator who had spent 30 years perfecting the art of destruction, and he had never been more patient than when planning the complete annihilation of those who dared to betray him. As the sun set over the city he owned, Rick began to plan. Chapter 2: The Web Titans. 3 days later, Rick had a complete dossier on Carlos Rivera spread across his private conference table. Beth Morrison, his executive assistant and former military intelligence officer, sat across from him with the clinical detachment of someone reporting on weather patterns. Carlos Miguel Rivera, 32 years old, born in Miami to Cuban immigrants. Beth began, her voice devoid of emotion. High school dropout, no college degree, but he's managed to charm his way into several businesses over the years. Rick studied the photographs. A handsome man with dark hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of smile that promised easy answers to difficult problems. The type of man who sold dreams to desperate people and nightmares to their families. Employment history? Sporadic. He's worked as everything from a yacht broker to a personal trainer to a lifestyle consultant, whatever that means. Currently lists himself as CEO of Rivera Consulting Group, which appears to be a shell company with no actual business. Criminal record? Clean, officially. But I found some interesting connections. Beth slid a folder across the table. He's been linked to 3 different women in the past 5 years. All wealthy, all married, all divorced within 2 years of meeting him. The settlements were generous. Rick's smile was razor thin. A professional. I can respect that, in a way. There's more. I tracked his recent movements through credit card records and social media. He's been in town for 6 months. And guess where he's been spending most of his time? Surprise me. The Willowbrook Country Club. Your wife's tennis club. He's been giving private lessons there since March. The pieces clicked into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. Diana's sudden interest in improving her tennis game. The new workout clothes. The glow she'd been carrying like a secret. Rick had built his fortune by recognizing patterns. And this one was as clear as a blueprint. What's his current financial situation? Desperate. He owes $60,000 to a private lender in Miami, the kind that breaks kneecaps when you're late with payments. The debt comes due next week. Rick closed the file and looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening gloom. Somewhere out there, his son was preparing to steal from him to save his wife's lover. The betrayal was so complete, so brazen, that Rick almost admired their audacity. "Beth, I want you to set up a meeting with our friends at Meridian Financial. Tell them I have an investment opportunity that might interest them." The private lending firm? The same one that's currently very interested in Mr. Rivera's financial well-being. Rick's voice carried the weight of inevitability. "I think it's time we became business partners." The next morning, Rick received a call from his son. Trevor's voice carried the nervous energy of a man about to commit a crime for love. "Dad, I need to discuss something with you about the foundation accounts." "Of course. Come to the office this afternoon." "Actually, I was hoping we could handle this over the phone. It's just a small matter." "Trevor." Rick's voice cut through his son's babbling like a scalpel. "My office. 2 o'clock. The line went quiet for a moment. "Yes, sir." At exactly 2 o'clock, Trevor walked into Rick's office wearing a suit that cost more than most people earned in a month, but looking like a man headed to his execution. He'd inherited his mother's delicate features and none of his father's steel, a combination that had made him popular with women and ineffective in business. Sit down. Trevor perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready for flight. Dad, I know this is unusual, but I have a friend who's in some temporary financial trouble. He's good for it, I promise. He just needs $60,000. Trevor's face went white. How did you? The same way I know everything that happens in my companies, my properties, and my family. Rick leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. The same way I know Carlos Rivera has been playing tennis with your mother 3 times a week for the past 4 months. The sound Trevor made was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. Dad, it's not what you think, isn't it? Rick stood and walked around the desk, moving with the predatory grace of a shark sensing blood. Your mother's fuck buddy needs money to pay off some very dangerous people, so she convinced you to steal from me to save him. Did I miss anything? Please, Dad, you don't understand. Mom says it's not serious, just a friendship, and Carlos is really in trouble. If he doesn't pay these people back, he'll disappear, probably permanently. Rick shrugged, and this concerns me how. Trevor shot to his feet, displaying more backbone than Rick had seen from him in years. Because I gave him my word. Because sometimes you have to help people, even when it's not profitable. Your word. Rick's laugh was devoid of humor. Son, let me teach you something about words. They're worthless unless backed by power, and you have no power. Everything you think you own, everything you think you control, it's all mine, including your word. I won't let you destroy him. Rick studied his son with the detached interest of an entomologist examining a particularly foolish insect. You won't let me? Trevor, you couldn't stop me from destroying you, and you're my own blood. What makes you think you can protect a stranger? Because I'm not you. Trevor's voice cracked with emotion. I still believe in doing the right thing. The right thing. Rick returned to his chair, his expression thoughtful. Very well. I'll make you a deal. Transfer the money to your friend. I won't stop you. Trevor blinked in confusion. You won't? I won't lift a finger to prevent you from taking $60,000 from the foundation accounts to give to Carlos Rivera. Rick's smile was the kind that made smart people run for the exits. In fact, I encourage it. Show me this backbone you've discovered. Prove to me that you're willing to stand up for your principles. I don't understand. What's the catch? No catch. Do what you think is right. Rick waved a dismissive hand. But Trevor, understand something. After you make that transfer, after you've committed theft from a federally regulated charity, after you've betrayed everything I've built, we're done. No more allowance, no more trust fund, no more family company. You'll be on your own, with whatever consequences that brings. Trevor stood frozen in the doorway, caught between his mother's expectations and his father's ultimatum. Rick could see the exact moment when his son realized he was trapped in a game where all the moves led to checkmate. Choose wisely, Rick said softly, because I never give second chances. Chapter 3. The Point of No Return. That evening, Rick sat in his study nursing a glass of 30-year-old scotch and watching his son through the security cameras he had installed throughout the house years ago. Trevor was in his bedroom, pacing like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear. Even without audio, Rick could read the desperation in his body language. The study door opened without a knock, a privilege Rick allowed only one person in his house. Still working? Diana asked, gliding into the room in a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's rent. Always. Rick didn't look up from his tablet, where he was reviewing the final contracts that would transfer ownership of Meridian Financial's debt portfolio to a series of shell companies he controlled. By tomorrow morning, he would own Carlos Rivera's soul. Diana moved to the bar cart and poured herself a glass of wine. Trevor seems upset about something. He's been on the phone all evening. Young men often struggle with difficult decisions. What kind of decisions? Rick finally looked at his wife, really looked at her. Even after 23 years, he could see why men found her attractive. She had the kind of beauty that aged gracefully, enhanced by the confidence that came with never having to worry about money. Too bad she'd never learned that some things were more valuable than security. The kind that define who they really are, Rick said. The moment when they choose between comfort and principle, between family and... He paused, letting the word hang in the air like a blade. Temptation. Diana's hand trembled slightly as she lifted the wine glass to her lips. I'm not sure I understand. Don't you? Rick set down his tablet and gave her his full attention. Trevor is planning to steal $60,000 from the foundation to help a friend. A very special friend, apparently. One who means enough to him that he's willing to throw away his entire future. The color drained from Diana's face. Rick, I can explain. Can you? Please do. I'm fascinated to hear how you'll explain seducing my son into committing federal crimes to save your lover. For a moment, Rick thought she might confess, might throw herself on his mercy and beg forgiveness. But Diana hadn't survived 23 years of marriage to a ruthless man by being weak. She straightened her shoulders and looked him directly in the eye. Carlos is just a friend, a tennis instructor who's helped me improve my game. Is that what we're calling it now? Rick's voice carried the weight of accumulated evidence. Tennis lessons that last 3 hours, and in with you buying him expensive jewelry? Improvement sessions that require you to visit his apartment twice a week. Diana's mask finally slipped, revealing the woman underneath, desperate, frightened, but still defiant. You've been having me followed. I've been protecting my investments. You and Trevor are significant investments, Diana. I like to know how my assets are performing. Assets? She laughed bitterly. Is that all we've ever been to you? What else would you be? Rick stood and walked to the window, looking out at the meticulously manicured gardens that surrounded their estate. Did you think this was love? This house, your jewelry, your lifestyle, it's all transaction. You gave me respectability and a son. I gave you everything money could buy. And that's enough for you? A life without real feeling, without passion. Rick turned back to her, and for the first time in their conversation, his expression showed something approaching pity. Diana, I've felt more passion in a single business negotiation than you've shown me in 20 years of marriage. You want to know what passion is? It's the desire to utterly destroy anyone who threatens what you've built. It's the patience to wait years for the perfect moment to strike. It's the commitment to see your enemies not just defeated, but obliterated. You're talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice. Rick returned to his chair, his movements precise and controlled. You see, Diana, you made a critical error. You assumed that because I tolerated your distance, your indifference, your barely concealed contempt, that I was weak. But tolerance isn't weakness, it's strategy. I allowed you to believe you were safe because comfortable enemies make predictable mistakes. Diana's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. What are you going to do? Nothing. Rick's smile was winter personified. I'm going to let you and Trevor do exactly what you've planned. Tomorrow, my son will transfer $60,000 to save your lover. He'll sign his name to documents that will destroy his future, believing he's being noble and brave. You can't let him. Let him. Rick's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Diana, I'm counting on it. Trevor needs to learn what real consequences feel like, and you need to understand what happens to people who mistake my patience for weakness. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted their conversation. Trevor appeared in the doorway, his face pale but determined. Dad, I made my decision. Rick leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment. Have you? I'm going to transfer the money. I know you think it's wrong, but sometimes doing the right thing means accepting the consequences. How admirably principled. Rick's voice carried no trace of mockery. If anything, he sounded almost proud. When? Tomorrow morning. First thing. Excellent. Make sure you use the wire transfer system. It's faster and more secure. Trevor blinked in confusion. You're not going to try to stop me? I told you I wouldn't. A man's word is his bond. After all, Rick stood and walked to his son, placing a hand on Trevor's shoulder with something approaching paternal warmth. I want you to know, son, that I respect your decision. It takes courage to stand up for what you believe in. I thank you. Don't thank me yet. Rick's grip on Trevor's shoulder tightened slightly. Save your gratitude for tomorrow evening, when you've had time to fully appreciate the consequences of your choices. As Trevor left the room, Diana moved closer to Rick, her voice barely a whisper. What have you done? I've given you both exactly what you wanted. Rick returned to his scotch, dismissing her with indifference. Freedom to make your own choices, live your own lives, face your own consequences. Isn't that what you've been asking for all these years? Diana fled the room, leaving Rick alone with his thoughts and his plans. Through the window, he could see the lights of the city where his empire sprawled like a living thing. Tomorrow, that empire would be smaller by one son and one wife, but it would be purified, cleansed of the weakness and betrayal that had been eating at its foundations. Rick raised his glass in a silent toast to the morning, when the real education would begin. Chapter 4. The Trap Springs. At 9:17 a.m. the next morning, Trevor Bowman signed his name to a wire transfer authorization that would change the trajectory of his life forever. Rick watched from his office via the security feed from the Foundation's building, observing his son's careful signature with the detached interest of a scientist watching a lab rat navigate a maze. The $60,000 moved through the electronic banking system with the speed of light, traveling from the Bowman Family Foundation's accounts to a holding company in the Cayman Islands, then to another shell corporation in Delaware, before finally landing in an account controlled by Meridian Financial, the same company Rick had quietly purchased controlling interest in 3 days earlier. At 9:23 a.m., Rick's private phone rang. Mr. Bowman, the transfer has been completed, said Vincent Torres, Meridian's head of collections. Your son's payment has been received and redirected according to your instructions. Perfect. And Mr. Rivera? He thinks his debt has been paid off. We sent him a confirmation email showing the transaction. He'll probably be celebrating right about now. Rick's smile could have cut diamond. Excellent. Phase 2 begins immediately. The second phase of Rick's plan unfolded with the precision of a military operation. At 10:15 a.m., Trevor received a phone call from Carlos Rivera, thanking him tearfully for saving his life. At 10:22 a.m., Diana called Carlos to congratulate him on his newfound freedom. At 10:35 a.m., Rick convened an emergency board meeting of Bowman Industries. The boardroom filled quickly with the 15 men and women who comprised the company's leadership, a collection of sharks Rick had handpicked for their ruthlessness and absolute loyalty to his vision. They took their seats around the polished oak table with the quiet efficiency of a military tribunal. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick began, standing at the head of the table with a stack of documents before him. We have a problem. The room fell silent. Rick commanded attention like a force of nature. This morning, my son Trevor committed wire fraud, theft from a federal charity, and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence is unambiguous. He slid copies of the transfer documents across the table. $60,000 stolen from the foundation to pay the debts of a con artist named Carlos Rivera. Board member Angela Frost, the company's chief legal counsel, reviewed the documents with practiced efficiency. The paper trail is clear. This is a federal crime. Indeed. Which brings us to our first order of business. Rick's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Effective immediately, Trevor Bowman is terminated from all positions within Bowman Industries and its subsidiaries. All access codes, credit cards, and company privileges are revoked. The vote was unanimous. Second order of business, Rick continued. I'm changing my will and the structure of the company's succession plan. Trevor is disinherited completely. Upon my death or incapacitation, controlling interest in Bowman Industries will transfer to the Bowman Legacy Trust, administered by this board. Another unanimous vote. Third and final order of business, Diana Bowman's divorce settlement. This brought surprised looks from around the table. Rick's marriage had always seemed stable, a foundation stone of his public image. I'm filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and conspiracy to commit fraud. Mrs. Bowman will receive the minimum settlement required by our prenuptial agreement, specifically $500,000 in 30 days to vacate all properties owned by me or my companies. Sir, interrupted Chief Financial Officer Peter Kane, what about her claim to community property? In this state, there is no community property. Rick's smile was arctic. Every asset, Every investment, every property was purchased with funds from companies I owned before our marriage or inherited through family trust she has no legal claim to. Our prenuptial agreement was comprehensive. The board members exchanged glances. They'd all underestimated just how thoroughly Rick had protected himself. The meeting is adjourned. Angela, I'll need the divorce papers filed within the hour. Peter, freeze all accounts Diana has access to, credit cards, expense accounts, everything. As of noon today, she's financially independent. As the board members filed out, Rick remained at the table, reviewing the final document in his stack, the deed transfer for Carlos Rivera's apartment building. It had taken his legal team exactly 2 hours to trace the ownership through a series of shell companies, then another hour to purchase it through intermediaries. Carlos Rivera, the man who thought he was free, was actually Rick's tenant, and his lease was about to expire. At 11:45 a.m., Diana burst into Rick's office without knocking, her usual composure shattered. "What have you done?" she demanded, waving a stack of papers. "These divorce documents. You can't be serious." Rick didn't look up from his computer. "I'm always serious about legal documents, Diana. You should know that by now. 23 years of marriage, and you're throwing it away over nothing." Nothing. Rick finally gave her his attention, and Diana stepped back at the cold fury in his eyes. "You conspired with our son to steal from me to save your lover. You turned my own child into a criminal. You corrupted the one thing in this world I actually cared about building, my legacy." Trevor made his own choice. Trevor is 25 years old and has the emotional maturity of a teenager because you spent his entire life poisoning him against me. You taught him that weakness was noble, that feelings mattered more than consequences. And now he's going to learn exactly how the real world treats weak, emotional people. Diana's voice cracked. "You're going to destroy your own son? I'm going to let him destroy himself, just like you did." Rick stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city spread below. In about 2 hours, Trevor is going to receive some very interesting news about his friend Carlos. It seems Mr. Rivera's debt wasn't actually paid off. It was just transferred to new ownership. "What are you talking about?" "I own Carlos Rivera's debt now. All $60,000 of it, plus interest and penalties. I also own his apartment building, his car loan, and several other debts he's accumulated over the years. As of this afternoon, Carlos Rivera belongs to me." Diana sank into a chair, the full scope of Rick's manipulation finally becoming clear. "You planned this. All of it." "Of course I did. The moment you mentioned his name, I knew exactly how this would play out. You're predictable, Diana. You always have been. Vain, selfish, desperate for attention from men who tell you what you want to hear. Carlos Rivera is just the latest in a long line of men who saw you coming from a mile away. And Trevor chose to betray me for a stranger. Now he gets to live with that choice." Rick's voice carried no emotion, as if he were discussing the weather. "I'll give him this much credit. He committed to his principles. Most people don't have the courage to follow their convictions all the way to their logical conclusion." Diana stood on unsteady legs. "I won't let you." "You won't let me what?" "Diana, as of 30 minutes ago, you have no legal standing in my life. No authority, no influence, no power whatsoever. You're about to become exactly what you were when I found you 24 years ago, a broke socialite with no marketable skills and expensive tastes." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Bowman, there's a Carlos Rivera here to see you. He says it's urgent." Rick's smile was genuinely pleased. "Perfect timing. Send him up." He turned to Diana. "I think you should stay for this. After all, it concerns you directly. Rick, please, sit down and be quiet. For once in your life, just watch and learn." Chapter 5, The Reckoning Begins. Carlos Rivera entered Rick's office with the nervous energy of a man who'd been celebrating his good fortune only to discover it might be premature. He was exactly as Rick had imagined. Handsome in an obvious way, expensively dressed despite his recent financial troubles, and carrying himself with the artificial confidence of a professional charmer. "Mr. Bowman, thank you for seeing me. I know this is unusual, but I've just received some disturbing information about the payment I received this morning." Rick gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please sit. And don't worry about the unusual nature of our meeting. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Carlos sat down, his eyes darting between Rick and Diana, who had gone pale as marble. I don't understand. My debt was paid off. I have the confirmation documents. But now I'm getting calls saying the debt has been transferred, not forgiven. That's correct. Rick opened a file folder with theatrical precision. Your debt to Meridian Financial has indeed been transferred. Congratulations, Mr. Rivera. You now owe $60,000 plus accrued interest and penalties to Bowman Financial Services. The color drained from Carlos's face. Bowman Financial? You mean, I own your debt. I own the company that holds your apartment lease. I own the financing company that has a lien on your BMW. In fact, Mr. Rivera, I own you. Rick's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The question is, what am I going to do with my new property? Carlos shot to his feet. This is impossible. The money was paid. The money was stolen, Rick corrected softly. From a federally regulated charity, by my son, at the request of my wife, to benefit her lover. That makes you an accessory to wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and about 6 other federal crimes I can think of off the top of my head. I didn't know, didn't you? Rick's smile was razor sharp. A struggling tennis instructor suddenly receives $60,000 from the son of the woman he's been sleeping with. And you didn't think to ask questions? That level of willful ignorance is almost impressive. Diana finally found her voice. Rick, stop this. Carlos didn't do anything wrong. Diana, please. The grown-ups are talking. Rick didn't take his eyes off Carlos. Now, Mr. Rivera, let's discuss your options. Option 1. I call the FBI and turn over evidence of your involvement in wire fraud. You'll spend the next 5 to 10 years in federal prison, assuming the people you originally owed money to don't find you first. Carlos sank back into his chair. What's option 2? Option 2 is much more interesting. You disappear. Tonight. You pack a bag, get in your car, and drive until you reach a state where Diana's married name means nothing to you. You never contact her again, never return to this city, and never speak to anyone about your time here. And my debt? Forgiven, along with your apartment lease and car payments. Consider it my divorce gift to Diana. I'm buying her lover's freedom as a gesture of goodwill. Carlos looked at Diana with something approaching panic. Diana, tell him. Diana has nothing to say in this matter. Rick interrupted. She's about to be very busy dealing with her own problems. Aren't you, dear? Diana's voice was barely a whisper. What do you want from me? Nothing, actually. That's the beauty of this situation. I don't need anything from you anymore. You've already given me everything I required. Rick pressed the intercom. Beth, please escort Mr. Rivera to the elevator. And, Mr. Rivera, I trust you'll make the right choice. I'd hate to have to pursue less elegant solutions to our problem. After Carlos left, Diana remained in her chair, staring at the floor. 23 years, and this is how it ends. This is how it was always going to end, Rick said matter-of-factly. The only variable was timing. You forced my hand by involving Trevor, but honestly, I'm grateful. It's better to handle these things cleanly. And what happens to me now? You get exactly what you wanted, freedom. Freedom from this marriage, from this house, from the burden of pretending to love a man you've always seen as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. Rick returned to his desk and began organizing papers as if Diana weren't there. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I've arranged for $500,000 to be transferred to your personal account. Enough to start over wherever you choose. $500,000? Rick, this house alone is worth $20 million. This house is mine, as are the vacation homes, the art collection, the jewelry you're wearing, and everything else you've mistaken for ours over the years. Rick's tone was clinical, professional. The prenuptial agreement you signed was quite specific about this. Diana stood slowly, her movements mechanical. And Trevor. Trevor is an adult who made an adult decision. He'll face adult consequences. He's your son. He was my son. Now he's a stranger who stole from me to help another stranger seduce my wife. Genetics don't create loyalty, Diana. And loyalty is the only currency I accept. As Diana reached the door, She turned back one final time. You know, Rick, I did love you once. In the beginning, when you were still human enough to love back. Rick didn't look up from his papers. Love is a luxury I never could afford. I learned a long time ago that power and fear are much more reliable than affection and trust. Is that enough? Is it enough to know that everyone who stays with you only does it because they're afraid to leave? It's enough. Rick's voice carried the finality of a closing grave. It's always been enough. After Diana left, Rick sat alone in his office as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. In 6 hours, he had dismantled a 23-year marriage, disinherited his only child, and eliminated a threat to his empire. It was, by any objective measure, a masterpiece of strategic planning and tactical execution. So why did victory taste like ashes in his mouth? The thought came and went like a brief shadow across his mind. Rick Bowman had not built an empire by indulging in sentiment or second-guessing himself. He had made the necessary choices, protected what mattered, and eliminated what threatened him. That it had cost him his family was irrelevant. Families were built on trust, and trust was a weakness he could no longer afford. Chapter 6: The Price of Betrayal. 3 hours later, Trevor sat in Rick's outer office like a condemned man waiting for his execution. Beth had called him with a simple message. Your father wants to see you. Immediately. The tone in her voice had carried implications that made Trevor's stomach clench with dread. When he finally entered the office, Rick was standing at his window again, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city with the posture of a general surveying a battlefield. Sit down, son. Trevor obeyed, noting immediately that his father's voice lacked its usual edge. If anything, Rick sounded almost sad. I suppose you're wondering why Carlos Rivera just came to see me. Trevor's blood turned to ice water. Dad, I can explain. No need. I understand perfectly. Rick turned from the window, and Trevor was shocked to see something approaching compassion in his father's eyes. You were trying to help someone you believed was in trouble. That's admirable in its way. Then why do you look like someone died? Rick moved to his desk and sat down, studying his son with the intensity of a judge weighing a life sentence. Because someone did die, Trevor. The son I thought I was raising died this morning when he chose to steal from me rather than trust me. I didn't steal. You committed wire fraud against a federal charity to benefit a man you'd never met, at the request of a woman who was using you to protect her lover. Rick's voice remained calm, almost gentle. If that's not theft, what would you call it? Trevor felt the walls closing in around him. How did you? Mom said Carlos was just a friend. Your mother said a lot of things over the years. Very few of them were true. Rick opened a folder and removed a photograph, sliding it across the desk. This was taken last Tuesday afternoon at the Riverside Hotel. Your mother and her tennis instructor seem very focused on their lesson. The photograph might as well have been a physical blow. Trevor stared at the image of his mother and Carlos locked in an intimate embrace, the world tilting sideways around him. Oh God, Trevor whispered. I didn't know. I swear to you, Dad, I had no idea. I believe you, which makes this conversation even more tragic. Rick retrieved the photograph and returned it to the folder. You see, Trevor, if you had known about their affair and still chosen to help Carlos, I could at least respect your loyalty, misguided as it was. But you didn't know. You were manipulated by your own mother into committing crimes on behalf of a stranger. Dad, please let me fix this. I'll pay back the money. With what? You have no money, Trevor. You never have. Everything you've ever owned, every dollar you've ever spent came from me. And as of this morning, that arrangement has ended. Trevor's voice cracked. What do you mean? I mean you disinherited. Cut off. Free to make your own way in the world without the burden of my expectations or my support. Rick's tone remained conversational, as if he were discussing dinner plans. The trust fund is dissolved, the credit cards are canceled, your apartment lease is terminated. As of 6 o'clock tonight, you're financially independent. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about business, son. And this is business now. You stole from me, betrayed my trust, and chose a stranger over your family. Those actions have consequences. Trevor shot to his feet, desperation making him bold. "I'm your son. I made one mistake. You made the only mistake that matters." Rick's voice finally carried an edge, sharp as a blade. "You chose to see me as your enemy instead of coming to me as your father. Do you have any idea what I would have done if you told me Carlos Rivera was threatening someone you cared about? I know. I would have eliminated him. Completely. Without hesitation or remorse. That's what fathers do. Trevor, they protect their children from threats, even when their children are too naive to recognize them." Rick stood and walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of his son. "But you didn't trust me. You trusted her. You trusted a woman who was using you to protect the man she was cheating with." The weight of Rick's words hit Trevor like a physical blow. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll do anything to fix this." "There's nothing to fix. You made your choice, and now you live with it." Rick moved to the door and opened it. "Security will escort you from the building. You have until midnight to remove your personal belongings from the apartment. After that, the locks will be changed." "Dad, please." "Trevor." Rick's voice stopped him at the threshold. "For what it's worth, I did love you. I hoped someday you'd grow into a man I could be proud of. Instead, you grew into someone I can't even recognize." As Trevor stumbled from the office, Rick closed the door and returned to his desk. The intercom buzzed immediately. "Sir, there's been a development with Mr. Rivera." "Go ahead." "He's decided to take option 1. He's currently at the FBI field office downtown, claiming he has information about wire fraud involving the Bowman Foundation." Rick's smile was winter personified. "How predictable. Beth, please call our attorneys and have them prepare for a federal investigation. Also, contact Agent Morrison at the Bureau. I believe she'll be very interested in the complete file we've prepared on Mr. Rivera's activities over the past 6 months." "Should I be concerned, sir?" "Not in the slightest. Mr. Rivera is about to discover that when you try to bite the hand that feeds you, sometimes that hand belongs to something much larger and more dangerous than you imagined." Rick leaned back in his chair and contemplated the evening ahead. In a few hours, he would go home to an empty house. No wife, no son, no family to pretend to care about his day. Just silence and the satisfaction of a job well done. It was exactly what he'd always expected his life to become. The only surprise was how little he felt about finally getting there. Chapter 7. The Final Gambit. The FBI investigation lasted exactly 18 hours. Agent Sarah Morrison, a 20-year veteran who'd worked with Rick on several cases involving corporate espionage, arrived at his office the next morning with the expression of someone who just wasted a significant amount of taxpayer money. "Congratulations, Rick. Your boy Rivera just gave us the most thoroughly documented false confession in Bureau history." Rick poured 2 cups of coffee from his private espresso machine. "False confession? He claims you coerced him into accepting stolen money, threatened him with violence, and manipulated your son into committing wire fraud." Morrison accepted the coffee gratefully. "Unfortunately for him, we have security footage of him voluntarily entering your building, phone records showing he called your son asking for money, and bank records proving the transfer was initiated from his own laptop using credentials only he possessed." "How unfortunate for Mr. Rivera." "It gets better. When we ran his background check, we discovered he's been running the same scam in 3 other cities over the past 5 years. Seduce married women, get their families to pay his debts, then disappear when things get complicated. We got arrest warrants for Miami, Chicago, and Seattle." Rick sipped his coffee with the satisfaction of a chess master watching his opponent realize checkmate was inevitable. "I assume Mr. Rivera won't be troubling anyone else for quite some time. Federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, extortion. He's looking at 15 to 20 if he goes to trial. His attorney is already talking plea bargain." Morrison studied Rick with professional curiosity. "You know, most people in your situation would have just hired someone to break his legs. This was much more elegant. I've never believed in crude solutions to complex problems." After Morrison left, Rick turned his attention to the morning's financial reports. Bowman Industries had gained another 12% in market value overnight, driven by rumors of a major acquisition and his announcement of a new succession structure. The board's decision to remove family influence from corporate governance had been received enthusiastically by institutional investors. His personal phone rang, a number he recognized as Trevor's. "Dad, I need to talk to you. We said everything that needed saying yesterday. Please, just 5 minutes. There's something you need to know about Mom." Against his better judgment, Rick found himself curious. "You have 2 minutes. She's gone. Left sometime during the night. Her clothes are gone. Her jewelry, everything. She left this note." Trevor's voice was hollow, broken. "It's addressed to you. Read it." "Rick, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere you can't find me. You win. You always win. But I want you to know that destroying Carlos won't change what happened between us. I stopped loving you years ago, not because of another man, but because you stopped being a man worth loving. You turned into something cold and calculating and cruel, and I couldn't pretend anymore that there was still something human left inside you. Trevor deserves better than both of us. Diana." Rick absorbed this information with the detached interest of someone reading a stock report. "Is that all? Dad, what happens now? Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices, just like I'm living with mine. I don't understand." Rick closed his eyes, suddenly feeling everyone is 55 years. "Trevor, do you want to know why I built this empire? Why I spent 30 years accumulating more money and power than any reasonable person could ever need? Yes. Because I was afraid. Afraid of being poor again, afraid of being powerless, afraid of anyone being able to hurt me the way my father's death hurt my mother." Rick's voice grew quiet, almost contemplative. "I thought if I became powerful enough, wealthy enough, ruthless enough, I could protect myself from loss. Instead, I guaranteed it. You're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense. I built walls so high that nothing could hurt me, and I succeeded. I also built them so high that nothing could reach me. Not love, not loyalty, not even my own family." Rick paused, staring out at the city he'd conquered. "Your mother's right, you know. I did stop being human somewhere along the way. I just never noticed when it happened. Dad, it's not too late. We could." "Yes, it is." Rick's voice regained its familiar edge. "The only difference between us, son, is that you still have time to become something better than I am. Use it wisely." The line went dead. Rick sat in the silence of his office, surrounded by the symbols of his success: awards, photographs with powerful people, art worth more than most people's homes. None of it had ever made him happy, but it had made him safe. Or so he believed. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent decades building defenses against abandonment, only to engineer his own isolation so thoroughly that abandonment became inevitable. His computer chimed with an incoming email from his private investigator. Diana had been spotted at Miami International Airport, boarding a flight to Zurich. The Swiss-numbered account he'd traced to her name had been accessed 3 hours ago. She'd been planning her escape for months, possibly years. Rick found himself almost impressed. Diana had played a longer game than he'd given her credit for, using Carlos as cover while she methodically moved assets offshore. She'd manipulated Trevor not just to save her lover, but to provide the final catalyst that would free her from their marriage with plausible justification. In the end, she'd proven herself to be exactly what Rick had always respected most: a worthy adversary. Chapter 8. The Hollow Crown. 6 months later, Rick Bowman stood at the pinnacle of everything he'd ever wanted. Bowman Industries had completed its largest acquisition in company history, expanding into 3 new markets and doubling its revenue. The business press hailed him as a visionary, a man who'd successfully transitioned from family business to corporate juggernaut without missing a beat. The personal cost of that transformation was evident only to those who looked closely enough to see it. His house, once filled with the chaotic energy of family life, had become a monument to solitude. Rick moved through its perfectly decorated rooms like a ghost haunting his own life, waited on by a staff who treated him with the respectful deference reserved for dangerous, unpredictable men. Trevor had disappeared entirely. Rick's private investigators had traced him as far as Portland, where he'd taken a job as a construction worker. Ironic, considering the millions in trust funds that had once been his birthright. He made no attempt to contact his father or return to his former life. Diana surfaced occasionally in the society pages of European publications, photographed at charity galas and cultural events on the arm of various men who looked nothing like Rick. She'd reinvented herself as an international socialite with mysterious means, the kind of woman who collected admirers and discarded them with equal facility. Carlos Rivera had pled guilty to federal wire fraud and was serving 8 years in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. Rick had made no effort to influence the sentence one way or another. Justice had taken its course with the inexorable efficiency he'd always admired. On a cold Thursday evening in November, Rick sat in his study reviewing quarterly reports when his doorbell rang. The household staff had been dismissed for the evening, leaving him alone in the 40-room mansion he'd built as a monument to his success. He found Trevor standing on his doorstep, looking older and leaner than Rick remembered. His son wore work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, steel-toed boots caked with mud. His hands bore the calluses of manual labor, and his eyes held something Rick had never seen there before: self-respect. "Hello, Dad." Rick stepped aside without a word, allowing Trevor to enter the foyer that had once been as familiar to him as his own breath. They stood facing each other across marble floors that had cost more than most people's houses. Two men who shared blood and nothing else. "You look well," Rick said finally. "I feel well. For the first time in my life, actually." Trevor's voice carried none of the nervous energy that had characterized his youth. "I came to tell you something. I'm listening. I forgive you." The words hit Rick with unexpected force. "Forgive me for everything. For cutting me off, for destroying our family, for choosing revenge over redemption." Trevor moved deeper into the house, his eyes taking in the familiar, yet somehow alien surroundings. "I spent the last 6 months hating you, then trying to understand you, then finally accepting that it doesn't matter. Doesn't it? You're who you are, Dad. You made choices based on who you are and what you believe about the world. I can't change that, and I can't change what those choices cost all of us." Trevor stopped in front of a family portrait that had hung in the hallway for 15 years. Rick, Diana, and Trevor smiling at some long-forgotten celebration. "But I can choose not to let your pain become my pain." Rick felt something crack inside his chest, a sensation he couldn't immediately identify. "And what about my choices? Do they deserve forgiveness?" "That's not for me to decide. You'll have to live with what you've done, just like I'll have to live with what I did." Trevor turned from the portrait, his expression calm and resolved. "I came here to tell you that I'm getting married. Congratulations." Rick was surprised to discover he meant it. "Her name is Sarah. She's a teacher. She knows about you, about our family, about everything that happened. She doesn't care about the money I'll never inherit or the name I'll probably never use in business again. She sounds practical." Trevor's smile was genuine, perhaps the first genuine smile Rick had seen from him since childhood. "She's real, Dad. She loves me for who I am now, not who I was born to be or what I might become. It's the first time in my life I've experienced anything like that." The crack in Rick's chest widened. "I'm happy for you. Are you? Really?" Rick considered the question seriously. "Yes, I think I am. You found something I spent 30 years destroying in myself, the ability to trust another person completely. That's valuable. It's everything." Trevor moved toward the door, then paused. "There's something else. Sarah is pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather." The words should have brought joy, or at least satisfaction. Instead, Rick felt only a hollow ache where those emotions might have lived. "Will I ever meet them?" Trevor studied his father's face for a long moment. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you can figure out how to be someone worth knowing." Trevor's voice was gentle but firm. "I won't expose my family to the man who destroyed his own family out of pride and fear. But if you ever remember how to be human again, you know where to find me." As Trevor reached for the door handle, Rick found himself speaking words he'd never expected to say. "I'm sorry." Trevor turned back, his expression unreadable. "For what?" "For failing you. For choosing to be your enemy instead of your father. For teaching you that power mattered more than love." Rick's voice was barely a whisper. "For losing the only things that ever really mattered." "Dad." I thought I was protecting myself from being hurt again. Instead, I guaranteed that I'd hurt everyone else first. Rick looked around at the empty mansion that had once been his dream. I won the war and lost everything worth fighting for. Trevor took a step back into the house. It doesn't have to stay that way, doesn't it? I've burned every bridge, Trevor. Destroyed every relationship. Made myself into something that people fear, but no one loves. Rick's laugh was bitter. I'm exactly what I wanted to be, untouchable. Untouchable isn't the same as unreachable. The two men stood in silence for several minutes, separated by 6 feet of marble floor and 25 years of accumulated damage. Finally, Trevor spoke again. Sarah and I are having the baby baptized at St. Mary's downtown. 3 weeks from Sunday. If you want to come, if you want to try being a grandfather instead of a destroyer of families, you're welcome. I wouldn't know how. None of us know how until we try. Trevor opened the door, letting cold November air into the heated foyer. The choice is yours, Dad. It always has been. Chapter 9, Redemption's Price. Rick Bowman spent the next 3 weeks engaged in the most difficult project of his life, learning how to be human again. It proved far more challenging than building a billion-dollar empire. He started by calling his therapist, a woman he'd seen exactly twice in his life, both times at Diana's insistence during particularly difficult periods in their marriage. Dr. Elizabeth Harper listened to his story with the professional calm of someone who'd heard every variation of human failure imaginable. You're asking me to help you undo 30 years of emotional conditioning, she said after his first session. That's not impossible, but it's not going to happen in 3 weeks. I don't have longer than 3 weeks. Mr. Bowman, redemption isn't a business transaction. You can't acquire emotional intelligence the way you acquire companies. This is going to take time, patience, and a willingness to accept that you might fail. I've never failed at anything I've set my mind to. Dr. Harper's smile was sympathetic but firm. That's exactly the attitude that got you into this situation. You're trying to control something that can't be controlled. Love, forgiveness, redemption. They're not commodities you can purchase or strategies you can implement. They're gifts that other people choose to give you, and they can't be earned through force of will. The session ended with Rick more frustrated than enlightened, but he returned the next day and the next. Slowly, painfully, he began to understand the difference between power and strength, between winning and succeeding, between being feared and being respected. The business world noticed his absence. For the first time in 20 years, Rick delegated major decisions to his executive team, spending his afternoons in therapy sessions instead of boardroom meetings. Stock analysts questioned his commitment. Competitors sensed opportunity. The business press speculated about his health. Rick found he didn't care. On the Friday before the baptism, he received an unexpected visitor. Diana stood in his office doorway looking elegant and self-possessed, as if the past year had been nothing more than an extended vacation. "Hello, Rick." "Diana." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "This is unexpected. I heard about Trevor's baby. Congratulations. You're going to be a grandfather." "How did you hear?" "I still have friends in the city. People talk." Diana settled into the chair with familiar grace. "I also heard you've been seeing Dr. Harper." Rick studied his ex-wife with interest. She looked well, rested, confident, somehow more substantial than she'd been during their marriage. "Are you here to gloat?" "I'm here to apologize." The words hit Rick like a physical blow. Apologize? For using Trevor, for manipulating him into a situation he wasn't equipped to handle, for putting him in the middle of our marriage instead of dealing with our problems directly. Diana's voice carried genuine remorse. "I spent so many years resenting you for being emotionally unavailable that I never considered I might be using our son as a weapon against you." Rick leaned back in his chair, processing this unexpected development. What about Carlos? Carlos was an escape, a way to feel alive again, desired again, something other than a trophy wife collecting dust on your shelf. Diana's smile was self-deprecating. He was also exactly what you said. He was a predator who saw me coming from a mile away. I was just too desperate for attention to care. And now I'm learning to live without defining myself through the men in my life. It's harder than it sounds, after 25 years of practice. Diana paused, her expression growing serious. Rick, I need you to know something. When I married you, I did love you. The problem was that I loved the man you were becoming, not the man you actually were. I don't understand. You were so driven, so passionate about building something significant. I thought marriage would soften you, make you more human. Instead, it just gave you more to protect, more reasons to build higher walls. Diana's voice grew quiet. I spent 20 years waiting for you to become someone you were never going to be, and you spent 20 years trying to be someone you thought I wanted. We were both living lies. Rick felt the familiar ache in his chest, the sensation of something important slipping away forever. Did we ever have a chance? I don't know. Maybe if we'd been honest with each other from the beginning, instead of pretending to be people we weren't. Diana stood, smoothing her skirt with nervous precision. I came here to tell you that Trevor's baby deserves better than what we gave him. That little girl deserves grandparents who know how to love without conditions, who can be present without trying to control everything around them. Little girl, Sarah's having a daughter. They're naming her Emily. Diana's smile was genuine, perhaps the first genuine smile Rick had seen from her in years. She's going to be beautiful and smart and completely innocent of all the damage we've done to each other. Diana, I'm leaving again tomorrow. Back to Europe, probably for good this time. But I wanted you to know that I hope you figure out how to be the grandfather Trevor never got to have as a father. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, Rick, I think you're capable of it. You just have to want it more than you want to be right. After she left, Rick sat alone in his office as the sun set over the city he'd conquered. In 2 days, he would walk into a church and try to be something he'd never been before. A man who put love ahead of control, who chose connection over protection, who was willing to be vulnerable for the sake of someone else's happiness. The thought terrified him more than any business negotiation he'd ever undertaken. That evening, Rick did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He called his mother. She lived in a modest apartment in the same Detroit neighborhood where Rick had grown up, surviving on Social Security and the small monthly checks he'd been sending her since he'd become successful. They spoke perhaps 3 times a year, awkward conversations that focused on her health and the weather. Richard, is everything all right? You never call this late. I'm fine, Mom. I just wanted to ask you something. Of course. Rick closed his eyes, feeling like a child again. When Dad died, how did you keep going? How did you not become bitter about everything you'd lost? The silence stretched so long that Rick wondered if the call had been dropped. Richard, his mother said finally, your father died trying to provide for us. He worked dangerous jobs because he wanted to give you opportunities he'd never had. If I'd spent the rest of my life angry about losing him, I would have wasted the gift he died to give me. What gift? You sweetheart. You were his gift to the world. A son who would never have to break his back in a factory, who would never have to choose between feeding his family and keeping them safe. Her voice grew soft. Your father would be so proud of what you've accomplished. But I think he'd be even prouder if you learned to enjoy it. I think I forgot how. Then learn again. It's never too late to remember who you used to be before the world taught you to be afraid. On Sunday morning, Rick Bowman stood outside St. Mary's Catholic Church wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars and feeling more uncertain than he had since the day he'd started his company with nothing but borrowed money and desperate ambition. The church was modest, nothing like the cathedral where he and Diana had been married. Sunlight streamed through simple stained glass windows, illuminating wooden pews filled with people Rick didn't recognize. Trevor's new life, his chosen family. Rick spotted his son near the front of the church, holding a baby girl in a white christening gown. Sarah stood beside him, glowing with the quiet radiance of new motherhood. They looked complete, self-contained, genuinely happy in a way Rick had never achieved despite all his success. For a moment, Rick considered leaving. These people didn't need him. They'd built something beautiful without his money or influence or protection. He had nothing to offer them except the promise to do no harm. Then Trevor looked back and saw him standing in the doorway. Their eyes met across 30 years of accumulated damage and disappointment, and Rick saw something in his son's face that he'd never seen before. Hope. Trevor smiled and gestured to an empty seat in the front pew. Rick Bowman walked forward into his grandson's new life, leaving his old self behind with each step. He didn't know if he could be the man this family needed him to be, but for the first time in 3 decades, he was willing to try. The baby gurgled softly as the priest began the ceremony, and Rick felt something he'd thought was gone forever, the possibility of unconditional love. It was more valuable than everything he'd ever built, and more fragile than anything he'd ever tried to protect. This time, he thought he might actually get it right. As the holy water touched Emily's forehead and she opened her eyes to look directly at her grandfather, Rick Bowman finally understood what he'd been fighting for all along. It had never been about winning. It had always been about love. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation Cracks. Trevor Mason had always believed in building things to last. At 38, he'd spent 15 years perfecting his craft as a custom home builder, creating dream houses for families across Colorado. His calloused hands and weathered face told the story of a man who understood that solid foundations required patience, precision, and unwavering commitment. The same principles had guided his 12-year marriage to Brenna. When they'd met at a charity fundraiser in Denver, she was 24, fresh out of college, and working as a marketing assistant. Trevor had been immediately drawn to her auburn hair and infectious laugh. But more than that, he'd admired her apparent warmth and kindness. She'd seemed different from the other women he'd dated. Genuine, down-to-earth, someone who appreciated the simple things in life. Their early years had been good. Trevor's business, Mason Custom Homes, had grown steadily, allowing them to build their own sprawling ranch house on 10 acres outside Boulder. Brenna had quit her job after their 3rd year of marriage, claiming she wanted to focus on starting a family and supporting Trevor's growing empire. But the children never came, despite their efforts, and somewhere along the way, the woman he'd married had changed. Trevor first noticed it about 3 years ago. Brenna had become increasingly distant, spending more time with her book club, her yoga classes, her girls' trips to Aspen. She'd started complaining about their quiet life, their lack of excitement, the way Trevor always smelled like sawdust and concrete. The criticisms had been subtle at first, wrapped in jokes and delivered with that same laugh that had once charmed him. But Trevor was a man who paid attention to details, and the details had been adding up. The late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. The new clothes, the expensive perfume, the sudden interest in working out. The way she'd flinch when he touched her, as if his hands were too rough, too working class for her refined tastes. Most telling of all was the way she'd started referring to their life together as boring and predictable, words that cut deeper than she probably realized. Tonight, Trevor had planned to surprise her with something decidedly unpredictable. He'd been working overtime for weeks, taking on extra projects and pushing his crew to meet impossible deadlines. The overtime had paid for 2 first-class tickets to Santorini, Greece, a destination Brenna had been dreaming about since she'd seen it featured in one of her glossy travel magazines. The resort was 5-star, the itinerary included private yacht tours and couple spa treatments, and the whole trip would last 2 weeks. It was the kind of grand romantic gesture that should have rekindled whatever spark had been missing from their marriage. Trevor pulled into their circular driveway at 9:30 p.m., later than usual, but buzzing with excitement. The house was lit up, and he could see Brenna's silhouette through the living room window. She wasn't alone. Her best friend, Jade Torres, was there, gesturing animatedly with a wine glass in her hand. The 2 women had been inseparable since college, and while Trevor had never particularly liked Jade's influence on his wife, he tolerated their friendship for Brenna's sake. He grabbed the envelope containing the travel documents and hotel confirmations from his truck. Along with a bottle of champagne, he'd picked up on the way home. The front door was unlocked, as always, one of the benefits of living in their secure, rural neighborhood. Trevor pushed the door open quietly, planning to surprise both women with his grand announcement. That's when he heard his wife's voice, crystal clear and dripping with venom. God, I hope he crashes on his way home from work tonight. Could use the life insurance money. Trevor froze in the entryway, the champagne bottle suddenly feeling like a lead weight in his hand. Through the archway leading to the living room, he could see Brenna sprawled on their leather sofa, her feet tucked under her, looking more relaxed and animated than she had in months. Jade's laugh was harsh and knowing. Or at least a few more weeks of silent treatment until he gets the hint that you're done playing house with him. How much longer are you going to keep this up, Brent? Kyle's getting impatient. Kyle. Trevor's blood turned to ice water. Kyle Richmond, the smooth-talking personal trainer at Brenna's gym. The man was 10 years younger than Trevor, with the kind of sculpted physique that came from a lifetime of privilege and leisure rather than honest work. Trevor had met him once at a charity boxing match, had noticed the way Kyle's eyes lingered on Brenna, had seen the practice smile that probably worked on half the married women in Boulder. I know, Brenna sighed, taking a long sip of her wine. But Trevor's been so pathetically eager lately, working all those extra hours, probably planning some romantic surprise. It's almost sad how hard he's trying to win me back when I checked out of this marriage 2 years ago. 2 years. Trevor calculated the timeline in his head. 2 years ago was when Brenna had joined the gym, when she'd started her fitness journey and all the lifestyle changes that had come with it. 2 years of lies, 2 years of sleeping next to a woman who was counting down the days until his death. At least Kyle knows how to show a woman a good time, Brenna continued, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. Last weekend at the cabin was incredible. I felt like a completely different person, like I was actually alive again, instead of just existing in this suburban tomb. The cabin. Trevor knew exactly which cabin she meant. The luxury rental in Vail that Kyle had mentioned during their brief encounter. The same weekend Brenna had told Trevor she was going to a women's wellness retreat. The same weekend Trevor had worked 16-hour days to earn the money for their dream vacation. You know what you need to do? Jade said, leaning forward conspiratorially. Make the move official. File for divorce. Take half of everything and start fresh with Kyle. You're 34, Bren, not dead. You deserve better than a blue-collar husband who thinks a romantic evening is pizza and Netflix. Brenna laughed, the sound that had once made Trevor's heart skip, now making him feel physically ill. The timing has to be perfect. Trevor's business is doing really well right now. He just landed that resort project in Park City. If I wait until after he signs the contracts, my settlement will be worth twice as much. Besides, Kyle and I are having fun with the whole forbidden affair thing. There's something exciting about sneaking around, about having this secret life that Trevor is too stupid to figure out. Trevor's grip tightened on the champagne bottle. The resort project in Park City, the one that would have secured their financial future for decades. The one he'd been planning to surprise her with tonight, along with a trip to Greece. Every detail of the past 3 years suddenly clicked into place with devastating clarity. The woman he'd loved, the woman he'd built a life with, had been systematically planning his emotional and financial destruction while he'd been working himself to exhaustion trying to make her happy. Just promise me you'll be careful, Jade said, though her tone suggested she was enjoying the drama rather than genuinely worried. Trevor seems like the type who might not take the news well. All that quiet intensity, those big hands. I always thought he was a little scary. Trevor, Brenna scoffed. He's a teddy bear. Biggest pushover I've ever met. When I finally tell him I want a divorce, he'll probably apologize for not being good enough and hand over the keys to everything he owns. That's just who he is, a people pleaser who'd rather avoid conflict than fight for what's his. Trevor set the champagne bottle down silently on the entryway table and pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket. The tickets to Santorini felt like evidence of his own stupidity, proof of how thoroughly he'd misjudged the woman he'd married. He walked quietly to the kitchen counter, placed the envelope in plain sight, and stood there for a moment, processing the magnitude of his wife's betrayal. Brenna was wrong about one thing. Trevor Mason was not a people pleaser. and he'd never been a pushover. He was a builder, a creator, someone who understood that the most important structures were built on solid foundations and careful planning. But he was also the son of a man who'd lost everything to a faithless woman, and he'd sworn long ago that he would never be that kind of victim. The conversation in the living room continued, each word carving deeper into what remained of Trevor's marriage. He listened for a few more minutes, memorizing details, filing away information that would prove useful later. Then, with the same quiet efficiency that had made him successful in business, he turned and walked back out of his house, closing the door behind him with barely a sound. As he drove away into the Colorado night, Trevor's phone buzzed with a text from Brenna. Working late again? Don't wait up. Jade and I are having girl time. Love you. Red heart. The heart emoji felt like a final insult. Trevor deleted the message without responding and kept driving, his mind already working through the first stages of what would become the most important project of his life. He'd built his last house for someone else. Now, it was time to build something for himself, something that would last. Chapter 2. Blueprint for Destruction. Trevor drove through the night, his mind churning with possibilities. By dawn, he'd reach his old hunting cabin in the mountains, a place Brenna had visited exactly once before declaring it too rustic for her tastes. The isolation that she'd found oppressive was exactly what Trevor needed now. Space to think, to plan, to become the man this situation required. The cabin had been his father's refuge during his own divorce proceedings 25 years ago. Robert Mason had been a different kind of man than his son, more prone to anger, less strategic in his thinking. When Robert's wife had left him for her tennis instructor, taking half of everything and turning their two sons against their father, Robert had drunk himself into an early grave rather than fight back. Trevor had been 13 when he'd found his father on the cabin floor, empty bottle in his hand, and a note that simply read, "Some foundations are too damaged to repair." Trevor had inherited the cabin and the lesson. He'd spent his teenage years watching his mother parade her new family around town, while his father's memory was systematically erased. The experience had taught him that nice men finish last, that turning the other cheek was just another way of saying you were too weak to fight back. But it had also taught him patience, observation, and the value of striking when your enemy least expected it. Over the next 3 days, Trevor methodically planned his response to Brenna's betrayal. He used his business connections to gather information about Kyle Richmond, learning that the man was drowning in debt despite his flashy lifestyle. The personal training business was a front. Kyle's real income came from his wealthy female clients, women who paid him handsomely for services that went far beyond fitness coaching. Brenna wasn't his first mark, and she certainly wouldn't be his last. Trevor also discovered that Kyle had been lying about several things. The man wasn't 34 as he'd claimed, but 42, with a criminal record that included fraud and assault charges from his 20s. He'd been married twice before, both marriages ending in bitter divorces that left his ex-wives financially devastated. The pattern was clear. Kyle was a professional predator who specialized in wealthy, unhappy housewives. The research confirmed what Trevor had suspected. Brenna wasn't a victim in this scenario. She was a willing participant in her own betrayal, someone who'd calculated the cost of her marriage and found it wanting. The woman who'd once cried watching romantic movies had become someone who could casually discuss her husband's death over wine with her friend. On the 4th day, Trevor received a call from his foreman, Miguel Santos, asking about the work schedule for the following week. The conversation gave Trevor an idea that would form the cornerstone of his revenge. "Miguel," Trevor said, "I need you to handle the Park City project for the next few weeks. Something personal has come up. Everything okay, boss?" Miguel's concern was genuine. The two men had worked together for 8 years, and Miguel was one of the few people Trevor considered a true friend. "Family issue," Trevor replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. "I need you to keep this between us, but I'm going to be out of town for a while. If anyone asks, tell them I'm scouting new locations for expansion." Miguel agreed without question, loyalty that Trevor appreciated and would remember. After hanging up, Trevor made several more calls, putting pieces in place for what would become the most elaborate construction project of his career, the systematic demolition of Brenna and Kyle's lives. The first phase required Trevor to become invisible. He'd already moved money from their joint accounts into a business account that only he controlled, a legal maneuver that Brenna wouldn't notice for weeks. He'd also transferred ownership of several properties into his company's name, protecting them from any potential divorce settlement. These weren't the actions of a man who intended to roll over and play dead. Trevor's phone rang constantly with calls from Brenna, each voicemail more frantic than the last. She'd found the plane tickets on the kitchen counter, had realized he'd been home that night, and overheard at least part of her conversation with Jade. The tone of her messages evolved from confusion to anger to panic as the days passed without any response from her husband. "Trevor, what the hell is going on?" Brenna's voice was sharp with irritation on day 2. "I found the tickets to Greece, and now you're just gone? This is childish, even for you." By day 4, the irritation had transformed into something closer to fear. "Okay, I know you're upset about something, but we need to talk about this like adults. Whatever you think you heard the other night, I can explain. Just come home so we can work this out." The final message came on day 6, Brenna's voice breaking with what sounded like genuine desperation. "Trevor, please. I'm scared. Miguel won't tell me where you are. Your friends haven't seen you, and I'm starting to think something terrible has happened. If you can hear this, just let me know you're okay. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. I love you." Trevor listened to that last message 3 times, analyzing the inflection in her voice, the timing of her pauses. Even now, facing the potential collapse of her carefully laid plans, Brenna was performing. The tears in her voice were real, but they weren't for him. They were for herself, for the comfortable life she was watching slip away. On the 7th day, Trevor drove back to Boulder, but not to his house. Instead, he went to the office of Patricia Hernandez, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Colorado. Patricia had built her reputation destroying unfaithful spouses, and her initial consultation fee was worth every penny. "Mr. Mason," Patricia said, reviewing the file Trevor had prepared, "I have to ask, are you certain you want to proceed this way? What you're proposing is completely legal, but it's also going to be devastating for your wife." "My wife wished for my death," Trevor replied evenly. "She's been planning to destroy me financially while carrying on an affair with a man who has a history of targeting married women. I'm not interested in being fair to someone who showed me no fairness." Patricia nodded, understanding the kind of client she was dealing with. "Then let's discuss your options. Based on the evidence you've gathered in Colorado's adultery laws, you have grounds for an at-fault divorce that could significantly impact the asset division. But I think you have something more creative in mind." Trevor smiled for the first time since that night in his kitchen. "I do. I want to give my wife exactly what she asked for, freedom from our marriage. But I want to make sure she understands the full cost of what she's chosen." As they discussed the specifics of Trevor's plan, Patricia's expression shifted from professional interest to something approaching admiration. Her new client wasn't just seeking revenge. He was architecting a masterpiece of legal and personal destruction that would leave his enemies with nothing but the consequences of their own choices. "This is going to take several months to execute properly," Patricia warned. "Are you prepared for that kind of commitment?" Trevor thought about his father's note, about the years of watching his mother's new family prosper while Robert Mason's legacy was forgotten. He thought about Brenna's laugh as she discussed his potential death, about Kyle's hands on his wife's body in the cabin Trevor's money had paid for. "Ms. Hernandez," he said, "I've been preparing for this my entire life." Chapter 3. The Ghost Returns. After 2 weeks of radio silence, Trevor finally came home. But the man who walked through the front door of the Mason house wasn't the same person who'd left with plane tickets and champagne. This version of Trevor moved with predatory stillness, speaking in measured tones that made Brenna's skin crawl with unease. "Where have you been?" Brenna demanded the moment he stepped into the living room. She'd been pacing for hours, checking her phone obsessively for any sign of her missing husband. The uncertainty was killing her, and worse, it was affecting her relationship with Kyle. Her lover had become distant and irritable as the days passed, clearly uncomfortable with the drama and potential complications of Trevor's disappearance. Working, Trevor replied, setting his duffel bag down with deliberate care. He looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time, his gaze lingering on the wine glasses she hadn't bothered to clean up from her conversation with Jade. I found the investors for the Park City expansion. Spent some time in the mountains, thinking about our future. The word future hung in the air between them like a challenge. Brenna studied her husband's face, searching for signs of the man she'd been able to manipulate so easily for years. What she saw instead was someone who looked like Trevor but felt like a stranger, cold, calculating, dangerous. "You disappeared for 2 weeks without a word," she said, trying to inject some righteous anger into her voice. "I was worried sick. I thought something had happened to you. Did you?" Trevor's question was soft, almost gentle, but there was something in his tone that made Brenna take a step backward. "That's interesting. I wouldn't have expected you to worry about my well-being." The words were carefully chosen, loaded with meaning that Brenna couldn't quite decipher. Had he heard her conversation with Jade? How much did he know? The uncertainty was torture, but she couldn't ask directly without revealing her own guilt. "Of course I was worried," she said, moving closer and reaching for his hand. "You're my husband. I love you." Trevor allowed her to take his hand, but didn't return the gesture. His skin felt cold, and when she looked into his eyes, she saw nothing of the warmth that had once made her feel safe and cherished. "Love," he repeated, as if testing the word. "That's a powerful thing, love. It can make people do incredible things for each other. Or terrible things." Before Brenna could respond, Trevor's phone buzzed. He answered it without looking at the caller ID, his voice shifting to the professional tone she'd heard him use with clients. "Trevor Mason? Yes, I'll be there." "No, my schedule is completely clear. I've decided to take a more hands-on approach to my business relationships." He hung up and looked at Brenna with something that might have been amusement. "I have a meeting tonight." "Don't wait up." "Tonight? But you just got home. I thought we could talk. Maybe go out to dinner, spend some time together." The words sounded desperate even to her own ears, but Brenna was starting to panic. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Trevor was supposed to be predictable, manageable, someone she could control while she planned her exit strategy. "I'm sure you can find something to occupy your time," Trevor said, walking toward the stairs. "Maybe call Jade or Kyle." Brenna's blood turned to ice. There it was, confirmation that he knew. But how much? And what was he planning to do about it? "Trevor, if this is about the other night." "What about the other night?" His voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "Is there something you need to tell me about the other night?" It felt like a trap, and Brenna was smart enough not to walk into it. "Nothing. I missed you." 2 weeks is a long time. Trevor nodded as if her answer was exactly what he'd expected. "It is. A lot can change in 2 weeks. I've learned some interesting things about the people in my life, about what they really think of me when they believe I'm not listening." He started up the stairs, then paused halfway. "Oh, and Brenna, I canceled the trip to Greece. I decided we needed to spend more time focusing on our life here in Boulder. I hope you don't mind." Watching him disappear into their bedroom, Brenna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The Trevor who'd left 2 weeks ago would have confronted her directly, would have demanded explanations and apologies. This version was playing a different game entirely, one where she didn't know the rules. She called Kyle the moment she heard Trevor's truck pull out of the driveway. "He's back," she said without preamble when Kyle answered. And Kyle's voice was clipped and patient. Their affair had lost much of its excitement during Trevor's absence, replaced by stress and uncertainty that Kyle clearly found unappealing. "He knows something. I can feel it. He's different, Kyle. Cold. He mentioned your name." There was a long pause before Kyle responded. "What exactly did he say?" "Nothing specific, but the way he looked at me." Brenna shivered, remembering those empty eyes. "I think he heard our conversation that night. The one with Jade." "Shit." Kyle's composure cracked slightly. "Okay, don't panic. Even if he knows about us, what's he going to do? File for divorce? So what? That's what you wanted anyway." But Brenna wasn't so sure anymore. The man who'd come home tonight didn't seem like someone who would simply hand over half of everything and disappear quietly. He seemed like someone who was planning something someone who'd been using the past 2 weeks to prepare for war. "I don't think he's going to make this easy," she said. "Maybe we should cool things down for a while. Wait and see what he does." "Cool things down." Kyle's voice turned sharp. "Brenna, I've been patient with this whole situation, but I'm not going to put my life on hold because your husband is having a tantrum. Either you're ready to leave him or you're not. I'm not interested in playing house with a married woman indefinitely." The ultimatum hit Brenna like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on managing Trevor that she'd forgotten Kyle was equally unpredictable, equally dangerous in his own way. Caught between two men who seemed to be hardening into adversaries, she felt the walls of her carefully constructed life closing in. "Give me some time," she pleaded. "Let me figure out what he knows, what he's planning. Then we can make our move." "You have 1 week," Kyle said. "After that, I'm done waiting. There are other options out there, Brenna. Don't forget that." The line went dead, leaving Brenna alone in the house that had once felt like a sanctuary but now felt like a prison. Outside, she could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows and doors that Trevor had installed with his own hands. Everything in this house bore his mark, his craftsmanship, his attention to detail. For the first time since this whole affair had begun, Brenna wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. The Trevor who'd built this house, who'd worked overtime to buy her dream vacation, who'd loved her completely and without reservation, that Trevor might have been worth fighting for. But it was too late for those thoughts now. The man who'd come home tonight wasn't interested in reconciliation. He was interested in something else entirely, something that made her feel like prey being stalked by a predator who'd learned patience. As the night wore on and Trevor didn't return, Brenna found herself checking the locks on the doors and windows, though she couldn't say exactly what she was trying to keep out. All she knew was that the foundation of her world was cracking, and the man she'd underestimated for so long was the one holding the sledgehammer. Chapter 4: The Hunter's Patience. Trevor's meeting that night wasn't with a client or investor. Instead, he sat in a dimly lit corner of Murphy's Tavern, Boulder's most discreet watering hole, across from Danny Reeves, a private investigator who specialized in matrimonial cases. Danny had been recommended by Patricia Hernandez, and his reputation for thoroughness was exactly what Trevor needed. "Your wife's not as careful as she thinks," Danny said, sliding a manila envelope across the scarred wooden table. "Richardson's got a routine. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he meets her at the Marriott downtown. They use different names, but it's the same room every time, 317. He pays cash, probably thinks that makes him invisible." Trevor opened the envelope and found photographs that confirmed what he'd already suspected. Brenna and Kyle entering the hotel separately, leaving at different times, their body language in the parking garage unmistakably intimate. The images were clear, professionally taken, legally admissible. "There's more," Danny continued. "Richardson's got a history of this kind of thing. I found 3 other women in the past 2 years, all married, all wealthy. 2 of them ended up divorced and financially ruined. The third one tried to kill herself when Richardson moved on to his next target." Trevor studied the photographs of Kyle with the other women. The man had a type: attractive, bored housewives with successful husbands and empty lives. His predatory patterns were clear once you knew what to look for. The initial charm offensive, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the promises of a better life, and then the systematic destruction of the woman's marriage and finances. "What about the wife?" Trevor asked, his voice betraying nothing of the emotions churning beneath the surface. "That's where it gets interesting," Danny replied. "Your wife's been busier than you might think. She's been meeting with divorce attorneys, 3 different ones over the past 6 months. Each consultation was paid for with cash from your joint account. Small amounts, nothing you'd notice unless you were looking for it." Trevor absorbed this information without surprise. Brenna had been planning his destruction for months, carefully laying groundwork while he'd been working himself to exhaustion trying to save their marriage. The vacation to Greece had been his last-ditch effort to reconnect with a woman who'd already written him off as a relic of her past. "She's also been documenting things," Danny continued, "taking photos of the house, copying financial documents, building a case for why she deserves a significant settlement. Your wife's not just cheating, Mr. Mason. She's conducting a strategic campaign. Good, Trevor said, surprising the investigator. I want her to be thorough. The more evidence she gathers, the better my case becomes. Danny raised an eyebrow. Most men would be upset by this news. Most men don't understand that the best way to defeat an enemy is to let them defeat themselves, Trevor replied. Continue the surveillance. I want to know every move they make, every conversation, every plan. And Danny, I want you to start looking into Richardson's business finances. A man with his spending habits and his pattern of targeting married women isn't making all his money from personal training. Over the following weeks, Trevor maintained his facade of normalcy while gathering intelligence on his targets. He went to work each morning, came home each evening, and played the part of a husband trying to rebuild his marriage. The performance was convincing enough that Brenna began to relax, interpreting his calm demeanor as ignorance rather than strategy. What Brenna didn't know was that Trevor had installed surveillance equipment throughout their house during one of her afternoon sessions with Kyle. Hidden cameras and audio devices provided him with a front-row seat to his wife's betrayal, documenting every lie, every cruel laugh, every moment of calculated deception. The recordings revealed the depth of Brenna's contempt for him. She mocked his work, his appearance, his attempts to salvage their relationship. She and Jade spent hours planning the perfect divorce strategy, discussing how to maximize her settlement while minimizing any potential backlash from Trevor. He's so pathetic, Brenna said during one recorded conversation. Last night, he actually asked if I wanted to renew our wedding vows for our anniversary. Can you imagine? Standing up in front of everyone and promising to love and honor a man I can barely stand to touch. Jade's response was equally venomous. At least you won't have to pretend much longer. Once Kyle gets his business sorted out, you too can go public. I can't wait to see the look on Trevor's face when he realizes you've been playing him this whole time. Trevor listened to these recordings with the same detached professionalism he brought to reading blueprints. Each revelation was filed away, cataloged, and incorporated into his expanding plan for revenge. His targets were providing him with everything he needed to destroy them. He just had to be patient enough to let them finish hanging themselves. The breakthrough came when Danny discovered the true source of Kyle's income. The personal training business was indeed a front, but not for what Trevor had expected. Kyle was running an elaborate blackmail scheme, using his affairs with married women to extort money from their husbands. The man had been secretly recording his sexual encounters, then approaching the women's spouses with demands for payment in exchange for discretion. He's done this at least 6 times, Danny reported during their next meeting. Amounts ranging from $50,000 to $200,000. The husbands pay to protect their wives' reputations and their own social standing. It's a perfect crime because nobody wants to admit they've been victimized. Trevor smiled for the second time since this ordeal had begun. Kyle Richardson had just handed him the weapon he needed to destroy both his wife and her lover in one devastating blow. The blackmailer was about to discover what happened when he tried to extort a man who understood the value of preparation and patience. I want copies of everything, Trevor told Danny. Financial records, correspondence, the names of his other victims. And I want you to find out when he plans to approach me with his proposition. You think he's going to try to blackmail you? I'm counting on it, Trevor replied. Kyle Richardson is a creature of habit, and his pattern is about to become his downfall. That night, Trevor went home to find Brenna waiting for him with dinner prepared and candles lit on the dining room table. She was wearing the black dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, the one she claimed made her feel beautiful. Her performance was flawless, the loving wife trying to reconnect with her husband. I thought we could have a romantic dinner, she said, kissing his cheek as he walked in. Just the two of us. No distractions. Trevor played his part, complimenting the meal and making conversation about his day. But underneath the facade, he was calculating the final moves in a game that Brenna didn't even know she was losing. Soon, very soon, his wife would understand what it meant to underestimate Trevor Mason. The hunter had been patient long enough. Now, it was time to set the trap. Chapter 5, The Web Titans. 3 days after the romantic dinner, Kyle Richardson made his move. The call came to Trevor's office on a Thursday afternoon. Kyle's voice smooth and confident on the other end of the line. Trevor, it's Kyle Richardson from the gym. We met at that charity boxing match a while back. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. There's something I need to discuss with you. It's about your wife. Trevor let silence hang between them for a moment, playing the part of a confused husband. About Brenna? Is she okay? Did something happen at the gym? She's fine, but we really need to talk in person. This isn't something I can discuss over the phone. How about tomorrow at 2 p.m.? There's a coffee shop called Grind on Pearl Street. Quiet, private. You'll want privacy for this conversation, trust me. Trevor agreed to the meeting, his voice carrying just the right amount of concern and confusion. After hanging up, he immediately called Danny Reeves to confirm that the investigator would be positioned to record the entire encounter. This was the moment Trevor had been waiting for. Kyle's greed was finally going to be his undoing. The next afternoon, Trevor arrived at Grind 15 minutes early and chose a corner table with clear sight lines. Danny was already in position at the counter, pretending to work on his laptop while his hidden camera captured everything. Kyle arrived precisely on time, looking like a man who'd done this dance before. "Trevor, thanks for meeting me," Kyle said, sliding into the chair across from him. "This is awkward as hell, but I felt like you needed to know." "Know what?" Trevor kept his expression neutral, though inside he was enjoying the performance. Kyle leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Your wife and I have been having an affair. I'm sorry, man. I know this is hard to hear, but she came on to me months ago, and things just escalated." Trevor let the words sink in, allowing his face to show the appropriate shock and pain. That's impossible. Brenna wouldn't. We're happy. We're working on our marriage. I know this is difficult," Kyle continued, his tone perfectly calibrated to sound sympathetic. "But I have proof. Photos, videos, recordings of our conversations. She's been planning to leave you for months, talking about taking half of everything in the divorce." The hook was set. Now Kyle would reel him in with a blackmail demand. "Look, Trevor, I don't want to destroy your life or embarrass your wife publicly. What happened between Brenna and me was a mistake. I take full responsibility for that. But if this information got out, it would ruin both of your reputations. Your business would suffer, your social standing in the community would be destroyed." Trevor said nothing, letting Kyle continue his pitch. "I'm prepared to disappear from Boulder, end things with Brenna, and delete all the evidence I have. But I need some help starting over somewhere else. $150,000 would be enough for me to relocate and never bother you or your wife again." There it was, the same pattern Kyle had used on 6 other men. The fake confession, the evidence, the reasonable-sounding demand wrapped in the illusion of protecting the victim's dignity. It was a masterful performance from a man who'd perfected his craft through repetition. Trevor let the silence stretch until Kyle began to look uncomfortable. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and measured. $150,000. I know it's a lot of money, but think about what you're protecting. Your marriage, your reputation, your business. Some things are worth more than money, right?" "You're absolutely right," Trevor said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Some things are worth more than money." Kyle relaxed, clearly believing he'd found another easy mark. His confidence evaporated when Trevor placed a digital recorder on the table between them. Like justice, Trevor finished, pressing the stop button on the device. Kyle's face went white as he stared at the recorder. "What the hell is that?" "Evidence," Trevor replied calmly. "Evidence of your attempted extortion, which is a felony in Colorado, along with the financial records showing your blackmail payments from 6 other victims. It should be enough to put you away for quite a while." "You can't prove anything," Kyle said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "It's your word against mine." Trevor smiled, a cold, predatory expression that made Kyle shrink back in his chair. "Actually, it's your word against you. See, Kyle, I know about Marcus Webb in Denver. I know about Robert Chun in Fort Collins. I know about David Torres in Colorado Springs. Should I keep going, or are you starting to understand the situation you're in?" The names of Kyle's previous victims hit like physical blows. The man who'd seemed so confident minutes earlier was now sweating, his eyes darting around the coffee shop as if looking for escape routes. "You've been running this scam for 3 years," Trevor continued conversationally. "Seducing married women, recording your encounters, then blackmailing their husbands. It's been a profitable business model, hasn't it? Until now. Kyle's desperation made him stupid. Look, we can work this out. I'll leave town, disappear completely. You'll never see me or hear from me again. Just let me walk away. Oh, you're going to disappear? Trevor agreed. But not the way you're thinking. You see, Kyle, I've already turned copies of all this evidence over to the FBI. Extortion across state lines is a federal crime. They're very interested in talking to you. As if summoned by Trevor's words, two men in dark suits appeared at their table. Kyle Richardson, one of them said, displaying his badge. FBI, you're under arrest for extortion, fraud, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. Kyle's arrest in the middle of the crowded coffee shop drew stares from every patron. As the federal agents led him away in handcuffs, Trevor remained seated, calmly finishing his coffee while Danny packed up his surveillance equipment. Phase 1 of Trevor's revenge was complete. But Kyle's arrest was just the opening move. The real game was about to begin. That evening, Trevor came home to find Brenna pacing frantically around their living room, her phone pressed to her ear. She was trying to call Kyle, but his phone was going straight to voicemail. Hard to answer when you're being processed into federal custody. Where have you been? She demanded the moment Trevor walked in. Kyle was supposed to meet me this afternoon, but he never showed up. He's not answering his phone, and I'm worried something happened to him. Trevor loosened his tie and sat down in his favorite chair, watching his wife with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab specimen. I wouldn't worry about Kyle. I'm sure he's exactly where he needs to be. Something in his tone made Brenna stop pacing. What do you mean by that? I mean that Kyle Richardson is no longer your concern. In fact, I think you're going to have much bigger problems to worry about very soon. Before Brenna could respond, there was a knock at the front door. Trevor didn't move to answer it, so Brenna went instead. When she opened the door, she found two police officers standing on their porch. Mrs. Mason? We need to speak with you about your relationship with Kyle Richardson. May we come in? Brenna's world tilted on its axis as she realized that somehow, impossibly, her carefully constructed secret life was collapsing around her. She looked back at Trevor, who was still sitting calmly in his chair, watching the scene unfold with what looked like satisfaction. Of course, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Please come in. As the officers entered their home, Trevor finally stood up. I think I'll let you handle this conversation privately, he said to Brenna. I have some calls to make. Walking past his wife toward the stairs, Trevor paused to whisper something only she could hear. You wanted your freedom, Brenna. Congratulations. You're about to get more than you bargained for. The hunter had sprung his trap. Now it was time to watch his prey struggle against the web they'd woven around themselves. Chapter 6. The Price of Betrayal. The police interview lasted 3 hours. Brenna emerged from the living room looking pale and shaken, her confidence shattered by the reality of her situation. The officers had questioned her extensively about her relationship with Kyle, his business practices, and her knowledge of his criminal activities. While they couldn't charge her with any crimes, they'd made it clear that she was now considered a witness in a federal investigation. Trevor was waiting for her in the kitchen, sitting at the table where she'd found the plane tickets to Greece what felt like a lifetime ago. He'd prepared 2 cups of coffee, a gesture that might have seemed thoughtful under different circumstances. How long have you known? Brenna asked, slumping into the chair across from him. Her voice was hoarse from 3 hours of careful answers and legal evasions. Which part? Trevor replied calmly. About your affair with Kyle? I've known since the night I came home with the vacation tickets. About his blackmail scheme? I figured that out a few weeks ago. About your plans to divorce me and take half of everything? I've known about that for months. Brenna stared at him in shock. Months? But you never said anything. You acted like everything was normal. Everything was normal, Trevor said. Normal for a marriage where one spouse is systematically planning to destroy the other while pretending to love them. Normal for a woman who wishes her husband would die so she could collect the insurance money. The words hit Brenna like physical blows. She'd forgotten about that conversation with Jade, forgotten that Trevor had been in the house that night. Hearing her own cruelty reflected back at her made her feel sick with shame and fear. Trevor, I never meant. You meant every word, he interrupted. And now you're going to live with the consequences of those words. Brenna looked around their kitchen, seeing it as if for the first time. This was a room where Trevor had prepared breakfast for her every morning for 12 years. The room where they'd planned their future, argued about money, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. The room where she'd systematically destroyed their marriage while he'd been trying to save it. What happens now? She asked quietly. Trevor reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it on the table between them. Now you sign these papers. Brenna opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were divorce documents, but not the kind she'd been expecting. These papers stripped her of any claim to Trevor's business, their house, or most of their shared assets. The settlement offered her enough money to start over, but nowhere near the fortune she'd been planning to claim. I can't sign this, she said, her voice rising with panic. This isn't fair. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together. Half of everything we built together, Trevor repeated thoughtfully. Let me ask you something, Brenna. What exactly did you build? I started my business before we met. I bought this land, designed this house, built it with my own hands. I worked 16-hour days to grow the company while you spent your afternoons planning my destruction. So tell me, what did you contribute to this marriage besides betrayal and lies? Brenna felt tears streaming down her face, but she could see that Trevor was unmoved by her distress. The man sitting across from her wasn't the gentle, forgiving husband she'd taken for granted for so many years. This was someone harder, colder, someone who'd learned to match cruelty with ruthlessness. If you don't sign willingly, Trevor continued, I'll file for an at-fault divorce based on adultery. In Colorado, that means you could end up with nothing at all. The choice is yours. You're destroying my life, Brenna whispered. No, Trevor corrected her. You destroyed your life. I'm just making sure you understand the cost of your choices. As Brenna stared at the papers, her phone buzzed with a text message from Jade. OMG, did you see the news? Kyle Richardson was arrested by the FBI. It's all over social media. Call me. Trevor must have seen her reaction to the message because he smiled that cold, predatory smile she was beginning to hate. Your friend Jade is going to have some interesting conversations with federal agents over the next few days. It turns out that Kyle recorded some of your conversations together, including the one where you discussed the best way to poison me if the car accident didn't work out. Brenna's blood turned to ice. That's not. We were joking. We were drunk and just talking nonsense. Were you? Trevor asked. Because the FBI takes conspiracy to commit murder very seriously, even when it's just joking. Of course, if you cooperate fully with the divorce proceedings, I might be willing to clarify for the authorities that your conversations with Kyle and Jade were purely hypothetical. But if you fight me on this, if you try to drag this out in court or claim assets that aren't rightfully yours. He didn't need to finish the threat. Brenna understood perfectly. She could sign the papers and start over with a modest settlement, or she could fight him and risk spending the rest of her life in federal prison. I need time to think, she said desperately. You have until tomorrow morning, Trevor replied, standing up from the table. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. I suggest you use the time to consider your options carefully. As Trevor walked away, Brenna called after him. What happened to you? You used to be kind, forgiving. You used to love me. Trevor paused in the doorway and looked back at his wife. Really looked at her for what might be the last time. I did love you. Completely. Unconditionally. I would have done anything for you, Brenna. I worked myself to exhaustion trying to make you happy, trying to be the husband you deserved. And in return, you wished for my death. His voice was quiet, matter of fact, but the words carried the weight of absolute finality. The man who loved you died the night he overheard you and Jade laughing about his life insurance policy. What's left is someone who learned not to forgive betrayal. Someone who learned that kindness is a weakness that people like you exploit. Brenna watched her husband disappear upstairs, leaving her alone with the divorce papers and the wreckage of her choices. Outside, the wind was picking up again, rattling the windows of the house that Trevor had built for them with his own hands. But this time, the sound didn't comfort her. This time, it sounded like everything solid in her world was coming apart. She thought about calling her lawyer, fighting the divorce settlement, demanding her fair share. But then she remembered Kyle's arrest, remembered the federal agent's questions about conspiracy and murder plots. She thought about spending the next 20 years in prison for a joke that hadn't seemed funny to anyone but her and Jade. By morning, Brenna had signed the papers. By afternoon, she was packing her belongings into suitcases, preparing to leave the only home she'd known as a married woman. As she worked, Trevor went about his normal routine, getting ready for work as if this were just another ordinary day. "Where will you go?" he asked as she loaded the last of her clothes into her car. "I don't know," Brenna replied honestly. "My parents, maybe, at least until I figure out what comes next." Trevor nodded, the conversation feeling as distant and polite as if they were strangers. "For what it's worth," he said, "I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for when you decided I wasn't enough." Brenna looked at her husband one last time, searching for any sign of the man who'd once loved her enough to work overtime to buy her dream vacation. What she found instead was a stranger who'd learned to weaponize the same patience and attention to detail that had made him successful in business. "I'm sorry," she said, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what she destroyed. "I know you are," Trevor replied, "but some things can't be repaired once they're broken. Some foundations are too damaged to rebuild." As Brenna drove away from the house that had been her home for over a decade, she realized that Trevor had given her exactly what she'd asked for: freedom from their marriage. But like everything else in his life, he'd built her liberation with precision and care, ensuring that every detail served his purpose rather than hers. The man who'd once loved her unconditionally had become the architect of her destruction. And the most terrifying part was that she'd given him every tool he needed to build her cage. Chapter 7, Reckoning. 6 months after Brenna's departure, Trevor's house felt different. Not empty. Trevor had never been a man who needed constant company to feel complete, but purposeful in a way it hadn't been during the final years of his marriage. Every room had been reclaimed, every space organized according to his preferences rather than the compromises that had defined his married life. The guest room where he'd slept that final night had been converted into a home office. The living room where Brenna had plotted his destruction with Jade now served as a workshop for his architectural drawings. The kitchen where she'd performed her final desperate charade had become a place where Trevor cooked simple meals for himself and occasionally for Miguel and the other men from his crew. Trevor's business had thrived in the wake of his divorce. The Park City Resort project had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget, leading to 3 more high-profile contracts. Word had spread through Colorado's construction industry that Trevor Mason was a man who delivered on his promises, someone who could be trusted to handle complex projects with discretion and professionalism. What his clients didn't know was that Trevor had learned to apply the same methodical approach to every aspect of his life. The man who'd once made decisions based on emotion and hope now operated with surgical precision, calculating the potential costs and benefits of every relationship, every business deal, every personal interaction. The transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. Patricia Hernandez, his divorce attorney, had referred several high-net-worth clients to him after witnessing how effectively he'd handled his own situation. Danny Reeves had become a regular consultant, helping Trevor screen potential business partners and employees with the same thoroughness he'd once applied to surveillance work. "You've built something impressive here," Patricia said during a dinner meeting at Trevor's house. She was reviewing the contracts for his latest project, a luxury development in Aspen that would cement his reputation as one of Colorado's premier builders. "Most people would have been destroyed by what your ex-wife put you through. Instead, you've used it as motivation to succeed." Trevor poured wine for both of them, choosing a bottle from the collection he'd started building after Brenna's departure. His ex-wife had preferred sweet wines, limiting his options for years. Now he could explore the complex, full-bodied reds that matched his evolved palate. "Destruction and creation aren't opposites," he replied. "Sometimes you have to tear down what isn't working before you can build something better." Patricia studied him over the rim of her wine glass. "Is that what you did with your marriage? Tore it down to build something better?" "My marriage was already broken," Trevor said. "I just stopped pretending it could be repaired." The conversation was interrupted by Trevor's phone buzzing with a call from Danny Reeves. Trevor answered, putting the call on speaker with Patricia's permission. Trevor, thought you'd want to know. Kyle Richardson was sentenced today. Federal judge gave him 8 years for the extortion charges, plus restitution to his victims. He won't be bothering anyone for a long time. Trevor felt a satisfaction that was both profound and cold. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the man who'd helped destroy his marriage was now facing the consequences of his predatory behavior. What about the other case? Trevor asked, referring to the investigation into Kyle's conspiracy discussions with Brenna and Jade. The prosecutor decided not to pursue charges, Danny replied. Without concrete evidence of intent to commit murder, they couldn't prove conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt. Your ex-wife and her friend got lucky. After hanging up, Patricia looked at Trevor with something that might have been concern. You don't seem disappointed that they weren't charged. I'm not, Trevor said honestly. Brenna's punishment isn't prison. It's living with the knowledge that she destroyed the best thing in her life for a man who was using her. That's a different kind of justice, but it's justice nonetheless. What Trevor didn't tell Patricia was that he'd been monitoring his ex-wife's situation through discreet channels. Brenna had moved back in with her parents in Ohio, taking a job as a receptionist at a dental office for a fraction of what she'd been accustomed to spending in a month. The settlement from their divorce had provided her with a modest nest egg, but her lifestyle had been drastically reduced. More importantly, her reputation in Boulder had been destroyed. The details of Kyle's arrest and the federal investigation had become public knowledge, and Brenna's role as both victim and accomplice had made her a pariah among their former social circle. The women who'd once envied her marriage to the successful builder now whispered about her poor judgment and moral failings. Jade Torres had fared even worse. Her involvement in the conspiracy conversations had cost her a lucrative marketing job, and no one in Boulder's tight-knit professional community would hire her. Last Trevor had heard, she'd moved to Phoenix and was working in retail while trying to rebuild her career from scratch. Have you thought about dating again? Patricia asked, bringing Trevor back to the present conversation. It's been 6 months. You're a successful, attractive man with a lot to offer the right woman. Trevor considered the question seriously. He'd had opportunities, women who'd made their interests clear through professional interactions or social events. But the idea of opening himself up to that kind of vulnerability again felt foreign, almost impossible. I'm not the same person I was when I married Brenna, he said finally. The man who fell in love with her was trusting, optimistic, willing to believe the best about people. That man doesn't exist anymore. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing, Patricia suggested. Trust and optimism are admirable qualities, but they can be weaknesses if they're not balanced with discernment and self-protection. Trevor nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. The man he'd become was harder, more calculating, less willing to make himself vulnerable to other people's betrayals. But he was also stronger, more successful, more capable of protecting himself and the people who deserve his loyalty. If I ever do get involved with someone again, he said, it will be on very different terms. No joint accounts, no shared property, no merging of lives until they've proven themselves over years, not months. And if they ever betray that trust. He didn't finish the sentence, but Patricia understood. The man sitting across from her had learned to be ruthless when necessary, to respond to betrayal with overwhelming force. Any woman who entered his life would need to understand that Trevor Mason was no longer someone who could be taken advantage of. As Patricia gathered her documents and prepared to leave, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think Brenna made the biggest mistake of her life when she chose Kyle Richardson over you. Some women don't recognize a good man until it's too late to keep him. Trevor walked her to her car, watching the taillights disappear into the Colorado night. The words were meant to be comforting, but they struck him as irrelevant. Whether Brenna regretted her choices or not was no longer his concern. She'd made her decision, and he'd made his. Inside the house, Trevor poured himself another glass of wine and stood in the living room where he'd once overheard his wife wishing for his death. The woman who'd spoken those words was gone, exiled from the life they'd built together. In her place was a lesson he'd never forget. That love without boundaries was just another word for vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury he could no longer afford. The foundation of his old life had been cracked beyond repair. But the man who'd learned to build something new on the ruins of his marriage was stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than the trusting husband who'd worked overtime to buy plane tickets to Greece. Trevor Mason had learned to become both architect and destroyer, and he'd never forget the price of either role. Chapter 8. No Forgiveness. 2 years after the divorce, Trevor's life had settled into a rhythm of controlled success. His construction company had expanded beyond Colorado, with projects in Utah, Wyoming, and Arizona. The house that had once been a symbol of his failed marriage had become the headquarters of a business empire built on reputation, precision, and the hard-won knowledge that trust was a commodity to be earned, not freely given. The call came on a Tuesday evening in late November. Trevor almost didn't answer. The number was blocked, and he'd learned to avoid unexpected communications. But something made him pick up, perhaps curiosity about who would be trying to reach him anonymously. "Trevor? It's Brenna." Her voice was different, smaller, uncertain, stripped of the confidence that had once made her so attractive. Trevor felt nothing at the sound of it. No lingering anger or hurt, just the mild interest he might have shown to a stranger. "Hello, Brenna. Why are you calling?" She paused, and he could hear her struggling to find words. "I wanted to apologize. I know it's been 2 years, and I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did to you. What I threw away." Trevor walked to his office window, looking out over the property where he'd once planned to build a future with this woman. "I see. And what exactly do you understand?" "That you loved me completely, and I destroyed that love because I was selfish and stupid and ungrateful." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I lost the best man I'll ever know because I thought I deserved something better, something more exciting. I was wrong about everything, Trevor. About you, about Kyle, about what would make me happy." The words hung in the air between them. Trevor found himself analyzing them with the same detachment he brought to reviewing construction contracts. The apology was probably genuine, born from 2 years of consequences and regret. But it was also irrelevant to the man he'd become. "How's life in Ohio?" he asked, changing the subject with deliberate casualness. Brenna's sharp intake of breath told him she was surprised by his lack of response to her apology. "It's difficult. My parents are getting older, and they need more help than I can give them while working full-time. The money from our settlement is running out faster than I expected. Everything's just harder than I thought it would be." Trevor nodded, though she couldn't see him. "And what about dating? Have you found the excitement you were looking for?" "No." The word came out as barely a whisper. "I tried, but I can't trust anyone. After Kyle, after learning what kind of person I'd throw my marriage away for, I can't believe anything anyone tells me. I keep thinking about how he recorded our conversations, how he planned to blackmail you, how little I meant to him beyond being another mark in his scheme." "Difficult to build relationships without trust," Trevor observed. "Trevor, I know I don't deserve to ask this, but I need help. My dad's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and my mom can't handle caring for him alone. The cost of professional care is more than I make in a year, and I don't have anyone else to turn to. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate." There was the real reason for the call. Not genuine remorse or a desire for forgiveness, but another crisis that required Trevor's resources to solve. Some people never changed, and Brenna was apparently one of them. "How much do you need?" Trevor asked, his voice giving away nothing of his thoughts. "50,000 would cover the first year of care. Maybe give me time to figure out a longer-term solution. I know it's a lot, and I know I have no right to ask, but I'll have my attorney wire the money to you tomorrow." Trevor interrupted. The silence stretched so long that Trevor wondered if the call had been dropped. Finally, Brenna spoke, her voice thick with tears. "I don't understand. Why would you help me after everything I did to you?" Trevor sat down at his desk, looking at a framed photo of the Aspen development that had just been featured in Architectural Digest. "Because your father was always kind to me, and because taking care of aging parents is the right thing to do. This has nothing to do with you, Brenna." It's about helping good people who don't deserve to suffer because their daughter made poor choices. Does this mean, could we maybe try to be friends again? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but maybe someday. No. The word was final, absolute. I'm helping your parents because they deserve help. But you and I have nothing to rebuild, nothing to repair. You made your choice when you wished for my death. I made mine when I decided to become the kind of man who doesn't forget betrayal. Brenna's sob was audible through the phone. I was drunk that night. I didn't mean what I said. I was just angry and frustrated, and you revealed who you really are, Trevor finished. People don't become different people when they're drunk, Brenna. They just become honest about who they've always been. You meant every word you said that night, and we both know it. So there's no chance? Ever? You'll never be able to forgive me. Trevor thought about the question seriously, examining his own feelings with the same precision he brought to everything else in his life. Was there any part of him that could imagine forgiving his ex-wife, welcoming her back into his life in any capacity? Forgiveness implies that I'm holding onto anger or resentment, he said finally. I'm not. I don't think about you enough to maintain those emotions. What you destroyed can't be rebuilt because the man who loved you no longer exists. I'm someone else now, someone who learned from your betrayal and used it to become stronger. I don't forgive you, Brenna, because forgiveness suggests that what you did was forgivable. It wasn't. The finality in his voice seemed to break something in her. I ruined everything, she whispered. I had a man who would have done anything for me, and I threw it away for nothing. I'm going to spend the rest of my life alone because I'm too damaged to trust anyone, and no one decent would want someone who betrayed her husband the way I betrayed you. Probably, Trevor agreed without cruelty, simply stating a fact. But that's not my problem to solve. You created this situation, and you'll have to live with it. The money from my parents will be transferred tomorrow. Consider it a gift from the man you used to be married to, not a loan or an obligation. We're done after this, Brenna. Don't call me again. Trevor hung up before she could respond. The conversation had been educational, confirming what he'd suspected about his ex-wife's current situation while reinforcing his own emotional distance from their shared past. He called Patricia Hernandez and arranged for the wire transfer, then poured himself a glass of wine and returned to the architectural plans spread across his desk. The interaction with Brenna had been nothing more than a brief interruption in his evening, no more significant than any other business call. The next morning, Trevor received a text message from a number he didn't recognize. Thank you for helping our daughter. We never forgot your kindness to our family. We're sorry for everything that happened. Helen and Robert, Brenna's parents. Trevor deleted the message without responding, but he felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with his ex-wife. He'd helped good people who deserved help, and he'd done it without compromising his principles or opening himself up to manipulation. 3 days later, Danny Reeves called with an update on Brenna's situation. Your ex-wife tried to contact Patricia Hernandez about the possibility of modifying the divorce settlement. Patricia told her that ship had sailed permanently and that any further contact would be considered harassment. Trevor wasn't surprised. Brenna's apology had been the first act in a campaign to reestablish some kind of relationship that she could exploit. When he'd made it clear that he was immune to emotional manipulation, she tried a more direct legal approach. Both strategies had failed because they were based on the assumption that he was still the same man she'd married, trusting, forgiving, willing to prioritize her needs over his own judgment. Make sure Patricia documents everything, Trevor told Danny. If Brenna continues trying to contact me or anyone in my business, I want a clear record for the restraining order. Already done, Danny replied, but I don't think she'll be a problem. The woman I've been watching for 2 years is broken, Trevor. Whatever you said to her during that phone call finished the job that Kyle Richardson started. Trevor felt no satisfaction in his ex-wife's suffering, but he felt no sympathy either. Brenna had made her choices with full knowledge of their potential consequences. The fact that those consequences had proven more severe than she'd anticipated was a lesson in the importance of thinking before acting, not a tragedy requiring his intervention. That evening, Trevor stood in the living room where he'd first overheard Brenna's betrayal, holding a glass of wine and reviewing the plans for his next project. The room that had once been filled with laughter and shared dreams now served as a monument to the importance of building one's life on solid foundations. The man who'd loved Brenna Mason unconditionally was gone, buried beneath 2 years of hard-won wisdom and carefully constructed emotional barriers. In his place stood someone stronger, more successful, and infinitely more careful about whom he chose to trust. Trevor Mason had learned that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, some relationships couldn't be repaired, and some people didn't deserve second chances. The lesson had cost him his marriage, but it had given him something more valuable: the knowledge that he was strong enough to survive anything life could throw at him, and ruthless enough to ensure that no one would ever destroy him again. Chapter 9. Foundations of Steel. 5 years had passed since the divorce, and Trevor Mason had become a legend in Colorado's construction industry. Mason Custom Developments now employed over 100 people across 4 states, with projects ranging from luxury resorts to sustainable housing communities. The company's success had made Trevor wealthy beyond his original dreams, but more importantly, it had validated his transformation from betrayed husband to uncompromising businessman. The call came from his lawyer's office on a Friday morning in April. Patricia Hernandez's assistant explained that there was an urgent matter requiring Trevor's immediate attention, something about his ex-wife and a situation that could potentially affect him. Trevor arrived at Patricia's downtown office to find her reviewing a thick file with a grim expression. Spread across her desk were police reports, medical records, and legal documents that painted a disturbing picture of Brenna's life since their last conversation 3 years earlier. "She's dead," Patricia said without preamble. "Suicide. They found her in a hotel room in Denver 2 days ago." Trevor absorbed the information without visible emotion, though he felt a strange disconnection from reality. The woman who'd once shared his bed, his dreams, his entire life was gone. The finality of it seemed to reduce their 12-year marriage to a historical footnote. "How?" he asked. "Overdose. Sleeping pills and alcohol." She left a note. Patricia slid a photocopy across the desk. "The police contacted me because you're mentioned in it." Trevor read the note, written in Brenna's familiar handwriting, but with a shakiness that suggested either emotional distress or physical illness. "I destroyed the only good thing in my life because I was too stupid and selfish to recognize what I had. Trevor tried to show me real love, and I threw it away for nothing. I can't live with what I did to him or who I became. I'm sorry for all the pain I caused. I hope someday he can forgive me, even though I'll never forgive myself." "There's more," Patricia continued. She'd been living rough for the past year. Lost her job in Ohio. Parents died within 6 months of each other. The money you sent for their care barely covered their medical expenses. She's been homeless, struggling with addiction, in and out of shelters. Trevor set the note down and looked out Patricia's window at the Denver skyline. Somewhere in this city, the woman who'd once wished for his death had ended her own life, alone and broken. He searched his feelings for some response: grief, regret, satisfaction, but found only a hollow acknowledgement of cause and effect. "The reason I called you," Patricia said, "is that she tried to contact you several times over the past month. My office blocked the attempts per your standing instructions, but the police found dozens of unsent letters in her belongings, all addressed to you." She produced another file folder. "These are copies. The police thought you should see them in case there are any threats or concerning content." Trevor opened the folder and found pages upon pages of Brenna's increasingly desperate attempts to reach him. The letters chronicled her descent from struggling but hopeful divorcee to broken woman facing the complete collapse of her life. Each letter begged for forgiveness, for a second chance, for some acknowledgement that their marriage had meant something worth remembering. "I know you hate me, and I deserve that. But please, just once, tell me that what we had was real. Tell me that for at least a little while, you loved me as much as I thought you did. I need to know that I'm not remembering a lie. I've lost everything, Trevor. My parents, my home, my self-respect. The only thing that keeps me going is the hope that maybe someday you'll answer one of my letters. I don't need forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I just need to know you don't completely regret the years we spent together. I dream about our house sometimes. Not the expensive things or the luxury, but the little moments. You making coffee in the morning, the way you'd kiss my forehead when you thought I was sleeping, the pride in your voice when you'd show me something you'd built. I threw away a lifetime of those moments for nothing. I'm so sorry, Trevor. I'm so goddamn sorry. Trevor read through the letters methodically, each one a window into the gradual disintegration of the woman he'd once loved. The progression was tragic in its inevitability. Hope giving way to desperation. Desperation yielding to despair, and finally despair surrendering to the kind of darkness that made death seem like mercy. She never remarried, Patricia said quietly. Never had children, never found anyone else. According to the social worker who'd been helping her, she talked about you constantly. Said she destroyed the only real love she'd ever known and couldn't figure out how to live with that knowledge. Trevor closed the file and leaned back in his chair. What do you need from me? Patricia looked surprised by his clinical response. The police want to know if you have any information about her mental state, if there were any threatening communications, anything that might shed light on her final weeks. No threatening communications, Trevor replied. As you know, I haven't spoken to her since the phone call about her parents 3 years ago. I made it clear then that we had no relationship to maintain. Trevor, Patricia said carefully, I have to ask, do you feel any responsibility for what happened to her? The question was one Trevor had been considering since reading Brenna's suicide note. Did he bear some moral culpability for his ex-wife's death? Had his refusal to forgive her, his absolute rejection of any reconciliation, contributed to her final decision? No, he said finally. Brenna made her choice when she betrayed our marriage. Every consequence that followed was the result of that original decision. I didn't force her to have an affair, I didn't make her wish for my death, and I didn't create the circumstances that led to her addiction and homelessness. I simply refused to rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. Patricia nodded, though Trevor sensed she wasn't entirely convinced. The funeral is tomorrow. Small service, just a few friends from Ohio. I thought you should know in case you wanted to attend. Trevor considered it briefly. There had been a time when he would have felt obligated to pay his respects, to honor the memory of the woman he'd once loved despite everything that had gone wrong between them. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who understood that attending Brenna's funeral would be a betrayal of the principles he'd built his new life upon. I won't be attending, he said. Send flowers if you think it's appropriate, but make sure the card is from the company, not from me personally. Walking out of Patricia's office, Trevor felt the weight of finality settling over him. Brenna's death had closed the last chapter of their shared story, but it had also confirmed the wisdom of his transformation. The woman who destroyed their marriage had ultimately destroyed herself, unable to live with the consequences of her betrayal. That evening, Trevor sat in his home office, surrounded by architectural plans and business documents that represented the empire he'd built from the ashes of his marriage. On his desk was a photo from his wedding day, the only picture of Brenna he'd kept. In it, she was laughing at something he'd said, her face radiant with joy and love that had seemed completely genuine at the time. Trevor studied the photo for a long moment, then placed it in his desk drawer next to the copies of her final letters. He wouldn't throw them away. They were part of his history, documentation of the price of betrayal and the importance of choosing one's commitments carefully. But they had no place in his present or future. The next morning, Trevor received a call from Miguel Santos, his foreman and the closest thing he had to a friend. Miguel had read about Brenna's death in the Denver Post and was calling to offer condolences. I'm sorry for your loss, boss, Miguel said. I know things ended badly between you two, but still, it's got to be hard. Thank you, Miguel. I appreciate the thought. You doing okay? You want to take some time off? Maybe get away for a while. Trevor looked around his office, at the success he'd built through discipline and determination. No, I'm fine. We have the Grand Junction project starting Monday. I want to be there for the groundbreaking. After hanging up, Trevor realized that Miguel's call had been the first expression of sympathy he'd genuinely appreciated. The man had worked for him for over a decade, had seen him through the worst period of his life, and had never asked for details or offered unsolicited advice. Miguel understood loyalty, understood that some things were too personal to share even with friends. Over the following weeks, Trevor received a handful of other calls and messages from people who'd known him and Brenna during their marriage. Most were brief expressions of sympathy, but a few were more probing, clearly fishing for details about their relationship and the circumstances surrounding her death. Trevor handled each conversation with the same polite distance he'd mastered over the past 5 years. He thanked people for their concern, confirmed that he was fine, and deflected any attempts to engage him in discussions about Brenna's mental state or their marriage's failure. The past was past, and he had no interest in relitigating decisions that had proven correct through the test of time. 6 months later, Trevor received a final piece of mail related to his ex-wife, a package from the administrator of her estate containing a few personal items that had been specifically designated for him in her will. Inside the package was his old wedding ring, the one he'd left on the kitchen counter the night he discovered her betrayal, along with a note in Brenna's handwriting. "This belongs to the man who deserved better than what I gave him. I hope he finds someone worthy of his love." Trevor held the ring for a moment, remembering the day he'd placed it on his finger with such hope and optimism. Then he put it back in a box and filed it away with the other artifacts of his former life. The man who'd worn that ring was gone, and the person he'd become had no use for symbols of failed promises. That evening, Trevor stood on the deck of his house, looking out over the property he'd designed and built as a monument to his own resilience. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of Boulder